Welcome to Wizarding What If. Before we begin, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and join the dark side of wizarding history. What if Harry Potter didn't just survive death, but claimed its power? As fear replaces hope and whispers replace prophecy, the wizarding world must face a terrifying truth. The boy who lived has become the wizard they fear. Chapter 1. The Veil's Price. The silence in the Department of Mysteries wasn't empty. It was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against the eardrums like the bottom of the Atlantic. In the center of the death chamber, the ancient stone archway stood tall, its tattered veil fluttering in a wind no one could feel. Harry Potter stood before it, his breathing ragged, the copper tang of blood coating his tongue. Sirius was gone, the image of his godfather falling back, that slow motion, agonizing descent into the gray mist, was burned into the back of Harry's eyelids. The boy who lived, a voice hissed from the shadows. Bellatrix Lestrange crawled from behind a fallen plinth, her hair a wild thicket of obsidian, her eyes gleaming with a madness that surpassed simple cruelty. The boy who lost. Did you hear him, Harry? Did you hear him scream for you as the cold took him? Harry didn't turn. His wand hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was a rhythmic, violent tremor born of a magic he didn't recognize. Something was clawing at the inside of his ribs, a dark, pulsing heat that made the air around him ripple. "He's not dead," Harry whispered. The words felt like shards of glass. "Bellet." Rix let out a cackle that scraped against the stone walls. "Oh, little baby Potter. He's more than dead, he's erased. There is no, behind the veil. There is only the void. And soon, you'll be joining your blood traitor family in the nothingness." She raised her wand, the tip glowing with a sickly, neon green. "Avada, stop." The word didn't come from Harry's mouth. It came from the room itself. The shadows beneath the stone benches elongated, stretching toward the archway like reaching fingers. The temperature plummeted. Frost blossomed across the floor, turning the dust into diamonds. Harry looked at his hands. They were translucent. He could see the skeletal structure of his fingers, glowing with a faint, ethereal violet light. The prophecy orb, shattered at his feet, wasn't just broken glass anymore. The smoke inside it was flowing into his boots, spiraling up his legs like a loyal hound. "To reach him, you must be of the same ink," a voice echoed in his skull. It wasn't Voldemort. It was older. It sounded like the grinding of tectonic plates. "The Master does not mourn. The Master commands." Bellatrix paused, her sneer faltering into a mask of confusion. "What is this? What trick are you playing, Potter?" Harry finally turned. His eyes were no longer emerald. They were the color of a dying star, white-hot centers bleeding into a void of black. "You think death is a destination," Harry said. His voice was layered, a chorus of 1,000 whispers behind a single, cold command. "You think it's a door you lock and walk away from. But I'm the one with the key, Bella." He didn't use a spell. He didn't even move his wand. He simply reached out and gripped the air. Bellatrix screamed as her feet left the floor. An invisible force dragged her toward him, her throat constricted by a spectral hand. She thrashed, her wand falling and clattering against the stone. "You want to see what's behind the curtain?" Harry stepped closer, his footsteps silent, leaving footprints of frost on the ground. "You want to know where my godfather went? I'll show you, but you won't be coming back to tell the Dark Lord about it." "Harry, stop." Remus Lupin burst into the chamber, followed by Neville and Luna. They skidded to a halt, the sight before them freezing the blood in their veins. Harry Potter was levitating 6 inches off the ground, surrounded by a swirling vortex of gray saint that seemed to be bleeding out of the veil itself. "Harry, let her go," Remus shouted, his voice cracking with terror. "This isn't you. That magic, it's ancient. It's cursed." Harry tilted his head, looking at Remus with an expression of profound, detached pity. "The light. Let Sirius die, Remus. The light is just a candle in a hurricane. I'm tired of flickering." Harry tightened his grip. Bellatrix's face turned a bruised purple, her eyes bulging. With a flick of his wrist, Harry slammed her into the stone archway. But she didn't hit the stone. The veil reacted to her presence, reaching out like a predator. Long, wispy tendrils of shadow wrapped around her limbs, pulling her into the fabric. She didn't scream this time. There was no air left in her lungs. She just vanished, bit by bit, into the gray. One down, Harry murmured. The chamber doors blew open. A high, cold laugh echoed through the hall. Lord Voldemort stepped into the room, his red eyes taking in the scene with a mixture of fury and sudden, sharp intrigue. He saw the empty air where his most loyal lieutenant had been. He saw the boy who was supposed to be his sacrifice standing in a shroud of necro-energy that shouldn't exist. Harry Potter, Voldemort said, his voice a silky threat. You've been playing with toys you don't understand. That archway is the end of all things. Not even I have dared to pull from its well. That's because you're afraid to die, Tom, Harry said, the use of the name hitting the room like a physical blow. You spent your whole life building Horcruxes, hiding your soul in trinkets like a coward. You wanted to conquer death. I just invited it in for a drink. Voldemort's face contorted. You think a bit of accidental magic and a spooky atmosphere makes you my equal. I have pushed the boundaries of magic further than any wizard alive. Then show me, Harry challenged. Voldemort moved with the speed of a striking viper. Avada Kedavra, the green bolt, a pillar of pure termination, raced across the chamber. It was a spell that had never been blocked, never been diverted. Harry didn't duck. He didn't cast a shield charm. He reached out and caught the curse in his bare hand. The room went silent. The green light didn't explode. It hissed, swirling around Harry's palm like captured lightning, turning from green to a dull, necrotic black. Harry looked at the dead magic dancing in his grip, then squeezed his fist. The spell dissipated into ash. My turn, Harry said. He pointed his wand at the floor. Surger. The ground groaned. From the cracks in the stone floor, skeletal hands began to emerge. These weren't inferi, fleshy, mindless puppets. These were the spirits of the Department of Mysteries, the echoes of every unspeakable experiment and failed soul that had ever been lost in these halls. They rose, draped in the same violet mist that clung to Harry, their eyeless sockets fixed on the Dark Lord. Kill the interloper, Harry commanded. The ghosts surged forward, a tide of vengeful history. Voldemort began casting frantically, fire spilling from his wand in great, roaring waves, but the spirits simply passed through the flames. They tore at his robes, their touch freezing his skin. Harry, please. Hermione's voice echoed from the doorway, weak and terrified. She was being supported by Ron, both of them staring at their best friend as if he were a monster they had never met. This is dark magic. It's changing you. Harry looked at them, and for a fleeting second, the violet glow dimmed. He saw the fear in Ron's eyes, the same fear Ron usually reserved for spiders. Now directed at him, he saw the tears on Hermione's face. But then he felt the cold vacuum in his chest where his heart used to be. He felt the absence of Sirius. He felt the weight of a prophecy that demanded he be a killer. It's not changing me, Hermione, Harry said, his voice dropping to a low, resonant boom. It's completing me. The world doesn't need a hero. It needs a reaper. Voldemort let out a scream of rage, unleashing a shockwave of dark energy that blasted the spirits back. He looked at Harry, his red eyes narrowed. You won't win this, Potter. You are a child playing with a god's weapon. I'm not playing, Harry said. He raised his wand to the ceiling. The glass jars containing the brains, the time turners, the prophecies, everything in the surrounding rooms began to shatter. The collective energy of a century of magical research spiraled toward the death chamber, fueling the vortex around Harry. I am the master of the Hallows, Tom. Even if I don't have the stone or the cloak yet. The soul of the third brother lives in my blood. And death recognizes its own. Harry swung his wand in a wide arc. A scythe of pure, black energy tore through the air, heading straight for Voldemort. The Dark Lord barely vanished in time, reappearing near the exit, his breathing heavy. For the first time in decades, Voldemort looked unsure. This isn't over, Voldemort spat, his form beginning to swirl into black smoke. You're right, Harry said, his eyes locking onto Voldemort's just as the Dark Lord fled. I'm coming for the rest of your soul. Every piece of it. As the dust settled, the members of the Order of the Phoenix began to trickle into the room. Dumbledore was at the lead, his face pale, his blue eyes searching the wreckage until they landed on Harry. Harry stood in the center of the chamber, the veil behind him finally still. The violet glow had receded into his skin, but his hair had turned a shock of stark white at the temples, and his scar was no longer a red lightning bolt, It was a jagged black rift that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. "Harry," Dumbledore said softly, stepping forward. "My boy, what have you done?" Harry looked at the headmaster. He didn't see a mentor anymore. He saw an old man who had kept secrets while children died. He saw a man who had let Sirius rot in a prison and then stay trapped in a house he hated. "I did what you couldn't." "Albus," Harry said. He didn't call him professor. The title felt beneath him now. "I stopped waiting for the prophecy to come true. I made it come true. The magic you've touched, it has a price," Dumbledore warned, his hand trembling slightly on his wand. "The Peverell legacy is a burden no soul can carry alone." "Then it's a good thing I'm not alone," Harry said. He looked back at the archway. "I can hear them, Albus. All of them. Every person the Dark Lord ever killed. They're screaming for justice, and I'm the only one who can give it to them." Harry started to walk toward the exit. The Order members stepped aside, none of them daring to bar his path. Even Mad-Eye Moody, with his magical eye spinning wildly, stayed silent. As Harry passed Ron and Hermione, he paused. He didn't look at them, but he spoke low enough that only they could hear. "Go home. Tell the world the boy who lived is dead. Tell them the King of Shadows has taken his place." He walked out of the Department of Mysteries, his footsteps echoing like a funeral march. Outside, the London sky was beginning to gray with the coming dawn, but for Harry Potter, the sun would never rise again. He was the end. He was the silence. He was death, and he was just getting started. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The White Tomb. The wizarding world didn't wake up to a headline, it woke up to a heartbeat. A rhythmic, low-frequency thrum that vibrated through the floorboards of every magical household from the Highlands to Cornwall. It was the sound of a new power anchoring itself into the earth. At 12 Grimmauld Place, the shadows were no longer just absence of light. They were thick, viscous, and loyal. Harry sat in Sirius's old armchair, draped in a heavy, charcoal-gray traveling cloak that seemed to swallow the dim light of the room. He hadn't slept. He didn't feel the need to. The hunger in his gut wasn't for food, it was for the jagged pieces of Voldemort's fractured soul were calling out to him across the map of England like beacons in the dark. "Master Harry," Creature croaked, appearing with a crack. The house elf didn't sneer anymore. He didn't mutter insults. He was trembling, his large eyes fixed on the black rift on Harry's forehead. He could smell the scent of the veil on him, the scent of the great beyond. "The half-blood headmaster is at the door. He Ings the werewolf and the girl with the bushy hair. Let them in, Creature," Harry said. His voice was a calm, resonant bass that vibrated the silver tea sets on the sideboard. "But tell Dumbledore to leave his wand in his pocket. If he draws on me in this house, I'll let the shadows eat him." A moment later, the door creaked open. Dumbledore stepped in, followed by Remus and Hermione. They looked exhausted, their faces sallow in the morning light. Hermione's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but when she saw Harry, she stopped dead. The air in the room was freezing. Frost patterns in the shape of skeletal lilies climbed the walls. "Harry," Dumbledore began, his voice weary. "We need to talk about what happened at the Ministry. The fallout is extensive. Fudge has resigned. The Ministry is in shambles. And the Daily Prophet is calling you a dark savior." "I don't care about Fudge, and I don't care about the papers," Harry said, not looking up from a weathered book of necromancy he'd pulled from the Black Library. "I care about the fact that Voldemort is still breathing. I care about the fact that he has anchors keeping him here." Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. "You know about the Horcruxes." "I know everything, Albus," Harry said, finally looking up. The white-hot centers of his eyes made Remus flinch. "I can feel them. They pulse. Like a sickness in the ley lines. You've been hunting them for years, haven't you? Tiptoeing around, afraid of the darkness inside them." "Well, I'm not afraid. I am the darkness." "Harry, listen to yourself," Hermione cried, stepping forward despite Remus's restraining hand. "You're talking like him. This power, it's twisting your mind. Look at this room. You're killing the very air." Harry stood up. He didn't move fast, but he seemed to occupy the space instantly. He stood before Hermione, towering over her. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. "I'm not twisting, Hermione. I'm straightening out," Harry said softly. "For 5 years, I was a pawn. I was a boy to be protected, a chosen one, to be groomed for a noble sacrifice. But the veil showed me the truth. There is no nobility in death. There is only the end. And I've decided that I'm the one who decides when that end comes. He turned his gaze to Dumbledore. You have the ring, don't you? The one that blackened your hand. Dumbledore stiffened. He slowly drew his right hand from his robes. It was shriveled, dead, and charred black. A curse of great complexity, Harry. A trap laid by Tom. It wasn't just a trap. It was a test you failed, Harry said. He reached out and gripped Dumbledore's dead wrist. Remus moved to intervene, but a wall of solid shadow rose from the floor, pinning the werewolf against the wall. Watch, Harry commanded. He closed his eyes. The black rift on his forehead began to bleed a violet vapor. He inhaled deeply, drawing the necrotic rot out of Dumbledore's arm. The blackness didn't vanish, it migrated. It flowed up Harry's fingers, into his veins, turning his own arm into a roadmap of obsidian lines before vanishing into his chest. Dumbledore gasped as feeling returned to his fingers. The flesh was still scarred, but the death curse was gone. How? Dumbledore whispered, staring at his hand. You treat death like an enemy to be outsmarted, Harry said, releasing him. I treat it like a hungry dog. I just gave it something better to eat than your arm. Harry walked to the window, looking out at the foggy London street. Voldemort thinks he's safe because he hid his soul in the earth and the sea. But I can hear the locket in the cave. I can hear the cup in the vault. I can hear the snake in his bed. And I can hear the peace that lives inside me. The room went deathly silent. Hermione let out a small, strangled sob. Harry, no, Remus whispered. Oh, yes, Harry said, a grim smile touching his lips. The boy who lived because he was a vessel. Voldemort made me his final Horcrux by accident. That's why. You were raising me like a pig for slaughter, wasn't it, Albus? You knew I had to die for him to fall. Dumbledore looked older than Harry had ever seen him. He looked ancient and fragile. It was the only way to ensure the soul was destroyed, Harry. I spent years searching for an alternative. I am the alternative, Harry snapped. He raised his hand, and the Elder Wand in Dumbledore's pocket began to vibrate violently. It flew out of the headmaster's robes, zipping into Harry's hand. Dumbledore didn't fight it. He looked almost relieved. The Death Stick, Harry murmured, feeling the raw, jagged power of the wand hum in his palm. It didn't resist him. It recognized him. It felt like a missing limb being reattached. The first of the three. It's been waiting for a hand that wasn't afraid to bleed. Harry, please, Dumbledore said, his voice cracking. The wand is a curse. It brings nothing but blood and sorrow. The world is already full of blood and sorrow, Albus. I'm just concentrating it, Harry said. He turned back to the group. I'm going to hunt them. Not with puzzles and riddles, but with fire and shadow. I'm going to tear his soul out of the world and burn the holes it leaves behind. We won't let you do this alone, Remus said, stepping away from the wall as the shadows receded. If you're going to war, the Order stands with you. The Order stands for the status quo, Harry said, his voice turning cold. You stand for the Ministry, for the rules, for the greater good. I stand for the end of the line. If you follow me, you follow a Reaper. You won't be arresting Death Eaters. You'll be burying them. He looked at Hermione. Are you ready for that? Are you ready to see what happens when the hero stops holding back? Hermione looked at the Elder Wand in his hand. Then at the terrifying vacancy in his eyes. She took a step back, her hand over her mouth. I don't know who you are anymore, she whispered. I'm the wizard the world feared was coming, Harry said. The one Voldemort was trying to prevent. The irony is, he's the one who gave me the keys to the kingdom. Harry tapped the Elder Wand against his palm. A shockwave of magic erupted from the house, blowing out every window in Grimmauld Place and sending a pillar of black fire into the sky that could be seen for miles. Creature, Harry shouted over the roar of the wind. Yes, master. Bring me the locket. The one your old master couldn't destroy. The one that's been rotting in this house for years. The house elf vanished and reappeared in a heartbeat, holding the gold locket with the emerald. The piece of Voldemort's soul inside it began to hiss and thrash, sensing the presence of its predator. Harry took the locket. He didn't use the sword of Gryffindor. He didn't use basilisk venom. He simply looked at the locket and spoke a single word in a language that predated speech. "Read it. Return." The locket didn't break. It melted. The black smoke of the soul fragment billowed out, screaming in 1,000 voices. Trying to find a host. It lunged for Hermione, but Harry caught it in midair with his bare hand. He didn't crush it. He inhaled it. Harry's back arched, his veins glowing with a sickly green light as the soul piece fought to take over his mind. For a moment, his face shifted, his features blurring into the snake-like visage of Voldemort. Then, with a roar that shook the foundations of the building, Harry forced the energy down. The green light turned violet, then black, and finally settled into his chest. Harry gasped, sweat dripping from his chin, his eyes blazing with a terrifying, newfound clarity. One more down, Harry panted, his voice now carrying a double tone, his own, and a ghostly echo of Voldemort's. "I can feel him now. He's at Malfoy Manor. He's afraid. He feels his soul thinning." Harry looked at Dumbledore, who was watching in horror. "The game is over, Albus. The board is broken. I'm going to the manor. You can come and try to save the souls of the monsters. Or you can stay here and watch the sky." Harry didn't wait for an answer. He turned into a cloud of black smoke, not the crude flight of the Death Eaters, but something more primal, more absolute. He shattered the roof of the house as he ascended, a dark comet streaking toward the horizon. The King of Shadows was moving, and the earth trembled beneath his shadow. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Iron Gate. Malfoy Manor didn't sit on the land, it loomed over it like a gravestone. The manicured hedges were skeletal under a moon that seemed to have lost its glow, bleached white by the presence of the thing approaching from the clouds. Inside the drawing room, the air was thick with the scent of expensive wine and cold sweat. Lucius Malfoy sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his fingers white-knuckled around his cane. Beside him, Narcissa stared into her glass, her reflection trembling. Around them sat the inner circle, Avery, McNair, the remaining Carrows, and at the far end, Lord Voldemort. The Dark Lord was not sitting. He was pacing, his bare feet silent on the floorboards. He looked diminished. The skin on his face was translucent, pulled tight over bone. And his red eyes were darting toward the windows every few seconds. "He is coming," Voldemort hissed, his voice like dry leaves skittering on a tomb. "The boy, he has taken the locket. I felt it, consumed. Not destroyed, consumed." Quote, "My lord," Lucius stammered, "the wards are ancient. They were built to withstand an army. No 17-year-old boy, regardless of what he found in the ministry, can." The sound began then. It wasn't an explosion. It was a rhythmic, metallic thrum. The iron gates at the edge of the estate, forged by goblin smiths and reinforced with centuries of blood wards, were screaming. The metal wasn't breaking, it was liquefying. A cold wind tore through the drawing room, extinguishing every candle. In the sudden pitch black, the only light came from Voldemort's eyes and a faint, pulsing violet glow emanating from the hallway. "Defend the perimeter," Voldemort roared. The Death Eaters scrambled, wands out, their footsteps frantic as they rushed toward the grand foyer. Lucius led the charge, his face a mask of desperate bravado. They reached the entrance just as the massive oak doors didn't fly open. They simply ceased to exist, turning into a fine gray ash that drifted in the breeze. Standing in the frame was Harry Potter. He wasn't the boy they remembered. He was taller, his silhouette elongated by a cloak that seemed to be made of living smoke. The Elder Wand was held loosely in his right hand, dripping sparks of black fire that ate holes into the floor. His white streaked hair whipped around a face that was as pale as marble, and the rift on his forehead was glowing with a light that made the Death Eater's eyes water. "Harry Potter," Lucius shouted, his voice cracking. "You are trespassing on sacred ground. You are." "Quiet, Lucius," Harry said. His voice didn't travel through the air, it arrived inside their minds, cold and absolute. "The time for talking ended when you let your wife's sister bleed out into the veil. I'm not here for your house. I'm here for the rot inside it. Kill him," McNair bellowed, leveling his wand. A dozen killing curses erupted at once. A barrage of emerald light that should have leveled the wing of the house. Harry didn't move. He didn't blink. As the spells reached him, the shadows behind him surged forward, forming a massive, translucent ribcage made of smoke and bone. The curses hit the ribs and were absorbed, their green light turning into a dull gray before being swallowed by the void. Harry stepped forward. With every footfall, the marble floor beneath him cracked, the fissures glowing with violet energy. Is that the best the dark can do? Harry asked. He tilted his head, looking at them with a terrifying curiosity. You've spent decades bullying children and torturing muggles, thinking you understood power. You don't know the first thing about it. He raised the Elder Wand. Cruciatus, Harry whispered. It wasn't the pinpoint curse of Voldemort. It was an atmospheric pressure. Every Death Eater in the room collapsed instantly, not screaming, but gasping, their nerves firing as if they were being flayed by ice. The air itself became a weapon, 1,000 invisible needles pressing into their pores. Harry walked through the writhing bodies, his eyes fixed on the doors to the drawing room. Harry, stop! A voice rang out from the stairs. Draco Malfoy stood there, his face ghostly, his wand held in a trembling hand. He looked down at his father, who was twitching on the floor, and then at the monster that used to be his rival. Don't do this, Potter, Draco choked out. This isn't you. This is something else. Harry stopped. He looked up at Draco. For a moment, the violet glow in his eyes softened, replaced by a deep, ancient weariness. You're right, Draco, Harry said. Potter would have forgiven you. Potter would have looked for the good in you. But Potter died in that chamber. I'm just what was left over. Harry flicked his wand. A lash of shadow wrapped around Draco's waist and pulled him off the stairs, depositing him gently, yet firmly, behind a line of frost Harry had drawn on the floor. Stay there, Harry commanded. This part isn't for you. Harry blew the drawing room doors off their hinges with a wave of his hand. Voldemort was waiting. He had summoned a shield of shimmering gold, a masterpiece of defensive magic. Between them sat the table, now a barrier. You've come to die again, Potter. Voldemort sneered, though his hand was trembling as he gripped his wand. I've come to collect, Tom, Harry said. You've been living on borrowed time. I'm the debt collector. Voldemort unleashed a torrent of fiendfire. The flames took the shape of a massive, multi-headed serpent that roared as it incinerated the mahogany table and lunged for Harry. Harry didn't retreat. He stepped into the fire. The flames licked at his cloak, but the smoke fabric didn't burn. Instead, the fiendfire seemed to bow to him. Harry reached into the HEA-RT of the magical fire and grabbed the serpent by its throat. The flames turned from orange to black as Harry's own necrotic energy infected the spell. Go back to your master, Harry whispered. He threw the black fire back. Voldemort gasped, barely managing to transfigure the flames into a swarm of iron daggers that fell harmlessly to the floor. How? Voldemort breathed. No wizard, no human Ol can control fiendfire with their bare hands. I told you, Harry said, closing the distance between them. I'm not just a wizard anymore. I'm the master of the Hallows. And I can feel the third one, Tom. It's right here. Harry's eyes dropped to Voldemort's hand. The Dark Lord was wearing a heavy, gold ring with a cracked black stone. The Resurrection Stone. Voldemort saw his gaze. He laughed, a high, hysterical sound. You want this? This useless rock? It was my grandfather's. It's a symbol of my bloodline. It is. It's a piece of my soul's inheritance, Harry interrupted. And you've been using it to keep yourself anchored. You've been using the stone to trap your own fragments in this world. It's why you can't truly die, but it's also why you're a ghost in your own skin. Harry held out his hand. Give it to me. Never. Voldemort screamed. Avada Kedavra. The green flash filled the room. This time, Harry didn't catch it. He didn't have to. The Elder Wand in his hand hummed, and the green bolt curved around Harry like a river flowing around a stone. It struck the wall behind him, shattering a portrait of Abraxas Malfoy. Harry was on him in a blur. He didn't use a spell. He grabbed Voldemort by the throat and slammed him into the wall. The impact cracked the stone. Voldemort thrashed, his pale hands clawing at Harry's wrists, but Harry was a statue of ice. I can see it now, Harry whispered, his face inches from Voldemort's. The piece of you that lives in the cup. It's in Gringotts, isn't it? Beneath the dragon. And the diadem, it's at the school. Hidden in the room where things are lost. Voldemort's eyes widened in genuine terror. How do you know? How can you see? Because your soul is a map, and I'm the cartographer, Harry said. He reached down and ripped Voldemort's finger, the one wearing the ring. With a brutal, clinical snap, Harry broke the finger and slid the ring off. Voldemort let out a scream that sounded like 1,000 dying souls. The moment the stone left his contact, his physical form began to blur, the magic holding his reconstructed body together starting to fail. Harry stepped back, holding the ring. He looked at the cracked stone. He felt the cold pull of it, the way it wanted to bring back the dead. Sirius, Harry whispered. The stone pulsed. For a second, a gray, ethereal figure appeared in the room. Sirius Black looked at Harry, but his eyes were full of sorrow. He wasn't the man Harry remembered. He was a shadow, a memory pulled back into a world he no longer belonged to. Don't, Harry, the shadow of Sirius whispered. Don't join me this way. Harry's jaw tightened. He looked at the shadow of his godfather, then at the cowering Dark Lord, then at the Death Eaters groaning in the hall. I'm not joining you, Sirius, Harry said, his voice breaking for the first time. I'm making sure no one else has to. Harry didn't put the ring on. He crushed it. He squeezed his fist, and the resurrection stone, an artifact that had survived for centuries, shattered into a fine, obsidian dust. A shockwave of pure spiritual energy erupted from his hand, blowing out the rest of the windows in the manor and sending a tray more through the very foundation of the earth. The shadow of Sirius smiled sadly and dissipated into the air. Voldemort collapsed to the floor, his skin gray and sloughing off in patches. He was barely human now, a shivering wreck of a man. You destroyed it, Voldemort wheezed. You destroyed a Hallow. You're a madman. I'm a god, Harry said, looking down at his dust-covered palm. And gods don't need anchors. Harry turned to look at the doorway. Dumbledore stood there, his face ashen, his wand raised but shaking. He had seen the destruction of the stone. He had seen Harry Potter break the laws of magic. Harry, Dumbledore whispered, you've broken the cycle, but at what cost to your soul? Harry looked at the headmaster. He felt the power of the Elder Wand and the essence of the stone now flowing through his veins, mingling with the blood of the Peverils. 2 of 3. The cost is irrelevant, Albus, Harry said. The job is almost done. There are 2 pieces left. The cup and the crown. And then, I'm coming for the snake. Harry walked toward Dumbledore. The headmaster didn't move, but the order members behind him, Kingsley, Tonks, Hestia, all stepped back in instinctual fear. I'm going to Gringotts, Harry said as he passed Dumbledore. Tell the goblins to open the vaults, or I'll turn the bank into a tomb. Harry, you can't just. I can, Harry said, pausing at the threshold. He looked back at the ruined drawing room, at the broken Dark Lord, and the terrified boy on the stairs. I am the master of death, Albus. And death doesn't ask for permission. He vanished into a swirl of black mist, leaving Malfoy Manor in a silence that felt like the end of the world. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Subterranean Void. London's morning fog was a sickly yellow, but over Diagon Alley. It had turned a bruised, electric purple. The cobblestones rattled. The air hummed with a resonance that made the glass windows of Flourish and Blots crack and spiderweb. Shops were shuttered. The owners huddled in their basements, because the word had spread through the Flow network like a wildfire. The boy who lived was no longer a boy, and he was no longer interested in saving anyone. Harry walked down the center of the alley, his boots clicking with a finality that sounded like a ticking clock. He didn't look left or right. His cloak didn't flutter. It flowed, a river of obsidian ink that seemed to erase the light it touched. Behind him, the shadows of the buildings elongated, following him like a pack of silent, loyal wolves. At the end of the street, the white marble of Gringotts Wizarding Bank stood like a fortress. The doors were bolted. The goblin guards, armed with axes of enchanted silver, stood in a phalanx at the top of the stairs. They were warriors of an ancient race. And they didn't scare easy. Stop, wizard, the lead goblin, Bogrod, barked. He leveled a spear at Harry's chest. The vaults are sealed by order of the director. No one enters Gringotts while the world is at war. Harry didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. The world isn't at war, Bogrod, Harry said, his voice echoing through the empty alley with the weight of a mountain. The world is under new management. Open the doors. You have no authority here, Potter. The goblin spat. We recognize no ministry, no dark lord, and no master of anything. Step back, or we'll see how your blood looks on the marble. Harry reached the bottom step. He looked up at the goblins, his white-hot eyes narrowing. The rift on his forehead pulsed once, twice, and a wave of pure necrotic pressure hit the stairs. The silver spears turned black. The goblin guards felt the warmth leave their bodies, their knees buckling under a weight that felt like the gravity of a dead star. Authority is a funny thing, Harry murmured. You think it comes from gold and contracts. But true authority comes from the one who holds the scythe. Harry raised the Elder Wand. He didn't cast a spell, he simply tapped the tip against the air. The massive bronze doors of Gringotts didn't just open. They screamed. The metal groaned as the internal locking mechanisms, centuries of intricate goblin magic, were forcibly rewritten. The bolts slagged into liquid. The hinges snapped. The doors swung inward so violently they shattered the inner marble columns. Harry walked past the paralyzed guards. Stay down. I'm only here for the rot. The lobby of Gringotts was a cavern of silence. Goblins were diving under desks, their ledgers flying. Griphook, the goblin Harry had once helped, stood by the central podium. His face a mask of calculated terror. The Lestrange vault, Harry commanded, his voice filling the hall. Take me there, Master Potter, Griphook stammered, his long fingers twitching. The protections, the dragon, the Gemino and Flagranti curses. Even if I took you, you would be buried in a mountain of burning gold. The gold doesn't want to burn me, Griphook. It's afraid of me, Harry said. He grabbed the goblin by the shoulder. The touch was so cold Griphook let out a whimper. Move. They descended into the bowels of the earth. The cart ride was a blur of stalactites and freezing wind. As they plunged deeper, the air grew thick with the smell of sulfur and old magic. Finally, the cart screeched to a halt in front of a massive, jagged cavern. The Ukrainian Ironbelly D. Ragon let out a roar that shook the stalactites loose. Its eyes were milky with cataracts, its scales scarred from years of torture by the goblins, clankers. It was a beast of pure rage, a living engine of destruction. Harry stepped out of the cart. Harry, no, a voice cried out from the tunnel behind them. Hermione and Ron skidded onto the platform. They were pale, out of breath, and covered in the dust of a city falling apart. They had followed him through the ruins of the bank's wards. Harry, you can't just walk in there. Ron shouted, his voice cracking. It's a dragon. A bloody dragon. It's a slave, Harry said without turning. The dragon lunged, its massive jaws opening to unleash a torrent of white-hot fire. Hermione screamed, raising her wand to cast a shield, but Harry was faster. He didn't shield. He stepped into the dragon's path and held up his hand. Peace, Harry commanded. The word wasn't spoken in English. It was a vibration, a primal frequency that resonated with the very spark of life inside the beast. The dragon's fire died in its throat. Its massive head stopped inches from Harry's hand. The beast's nostrils flared, smelling the scent of the veil, the scent of the master. The dragon lowered its head, a low, sub-bass rumble of submission vibrating through the floor. It wasn't tamed, it was recognized. Harry stroked the dragon's snout. You've spent enough time in the dark. Go. With a flick of the Elder Wand, the heavy chains binding the dragon's feet turned into dust. The beast let out a cry that sounded almost like a sob, then turned and began to crawl up the tunnel toward the surface. Its massive wings scraping the stone. You let it go, Ron whispered, staring in awe. You just let it go. Everything has a right to die in the sun, Harry said. He turned toward the Lestrange vault. The door was a solid slab of enchanted gold. Harry didn't wait for Griphook. He placed his hand on the metal. The Flagranti curse activated instantly. The gold glowed red-hot, designed to sear the flesh from the bones of any thief. The Gemino curse began to multiply the gold, intending to crush the intruder under an infinite weight of metal. Harry's skin didn't burn. The violet glow from his veins acted as a heat sink, absorbing the curse's energy. He pushed. The gold door didn't open. It folded like wet paper, tearing away from the rock. Inside, the vault was a mountain of treasures, but Harry didn't look at the swords or the jewels. He looked at a small, unassuming gold cup with two handles, sitting on a high shelf. Hufflepuff's cup. Th. A soul fragment inside the cup felt Harry's presence. It began to shriek, a high-pitched, mental wail that made Ron and Hermione collapse to their knees, clutching their heads. "Harry, make it stop," Hermione gasped. It's inside my brain." Harry walked toward the cup. The gold piles around him began to multiply, rising up like waves to bury him. He ignored them. Every piece of gold that touched him turned to gray ash instantly. He reached the shelf and picked up the cup. The Horcrux fought back. A shadow version of Voldemort erupted from the cup, a twisted, smoke-like entity with claws of darkness. It lunged for Harry's throat. "You are mine, boy," the shadow hissed. "I am the blood in your veins. I am the breath in your lungs. You cannot kill what you are." Harry looked at the shadow, his expression one of utter boredom. "You are a splinter," Harry said, "and I'm the one pulling you out." Harry didn't use a spell. He didn't use the sword. He brought the cup to his face and inhaled. The black smoke of the soul fragment was sucked into Harry's mouth and nostrils. His eyes flared with a blinding, necrotic white light. His body spasmed, his feet leaving the floor as he absorbed the power and the rot of the third Horcrux. The vault went silent. The multiplying gold stopped. The heat vanished. Harry landed softly on his feet. He dropped the now dull, lifeless cup. It hit the floor with a hollow clink. He turned to look at Ron and Hermione. He looked stronger, faster. His skin had a slight, metallic sheen to it, and the air around him was so cold their breath hitched in their throats. "That's 3, Harry said. His voice was now a trio of tones. His own, the hissing echo of Voldemort, and a third, deeper voice that sounded like the crushing of skulls. "Harry," Hermione said, her voice trembling as she stood up. "Look at what you're doing. You're not just destroying them. You're taking them into yourself. You're becoming him." "No," Harry said, stepping out of the vault. "I'm becoming the only thing that can end him." He thought he was clever, splitting himself. He thought he was making himself immortal. But he was just making a feast. "You're scaring me, Harry," Ron said, his hand on his wand, though he looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "The way you look, the way you talk, this isn't the guy the first met on the train." Harry looked at Ron. For a split second, a flash of genuine, human pain crossed his face. He remembered the chocolate frogs. He remembered the chess games in the common room. He remembered the boy who had been his first friend. But then, the black rift on his forehead burned. The memories felt like they belonged to a ghost. "The guy on the train was a target, Ron," Harry said. "The guy standing here is the hunter. If you can't handle the blood, go back to the burrow. Lock the doors. Don't come out until the sky stops turning black. We're not leaving you," Hermione cried. "We're your friends. We love you. Then love me from a distance," Harry said. He looked up at the ceiling of the cavern. He could feel it now, the fourth piece. It was calling to him from the north. Hogwarts. The castle was singing to him, a song of stone and ancient secrets. "He's going to the school," Harry whispered. "He's desperate now. He's going to hide behind the children. He thinks I won't strike if the castle is full. He's right, isn't he?" Ron asked, hope flickering in his eyes. You wouldn't hurt the students." Harry didn't answer. He turned into a pillar of black smoke, erupting upward through the floor of the vault, through the levels of Gringotts, and finally bursting out of the roof of the bank. The dragon was already circling the London skyline, letting out a roar of freedom. Harry flew past it, a dark streak across the sun, heading toward the mountains of Scotland. Below him, the wizarding world looked like a dollhouse. Tiny, fragile, and ready to break. Harry Potter wasn't a savior anymore. He was a storm, and the storm was coming home to Hogwarts. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. The Shattered Crown. The Scottish Highlands were screaming. An unnatural gale tore through the great hall, extinguishing the floating candles and sending the house banners into a frantic, snapping frenzy. The students, hundreds of them, were huddled at their tables, their faces pale reflections of the terror that had gripped the world outside. At the high table, Severus Snape stood as the new headmaster, his black robes billowing like a bat's wings. Beside him, the Carrow siblings held their wands with trembling fingers, their eyes darting to the massive oak doors. They had felt the wards snap. They had felt the ancient stone of Hogwarts groan as if its heart had been pierced. Then, the doors didn't open. They vanished. One moment they were solid oak, the next, they were a fine, gray mist that settled over the floor like graveyard fog. Harry Potter walked into the hall. The silence that followed was absolute. He wasn't the boy who had fled the castle a year ago. He was a nightmare carved from obsidian. His skin was the color of moonlight on a blade, and the air around him crackled with a cold, violet electricity. The Elder Wand sat in his hand like it had grown there, humming a low, vibrating note of total dominance. Harry. Ginny Weasley's voice was a small, broken thing from the Gryffindor table. Harry didn't look at her. He didn't look at the students. His gaze was locked on the high table. Severus, Harry said. The name echoed with the weight of a falling gavel. Step down. This castle belongs to the students, not the carrion. Amicus Carrow let out a nervous, jagged laugh. You think you can just walk in here, Potter? We have the Dark Lord's protection. We have. Harry flicked the Elder Wand. It was a movement so fast it was almost invisible. A bolt of black lightning erupted from the tip, striking Amicus square in the chest. There was no explosion, only a wet, sickening thud. The Death Eater didn't fall. He disappeared. Where he had stood, there was only a scorched patch on the stone floor and a lingering scent of ozone and rot. Alecto Carrow screamed, but before she could raise her wand, the shadows from the corners of the hall lunged forward, wrapping around her throat and pulling her into the darkness of the rafters. Her screams were cut short. Snape didn't move. His black eyes searched Harry's face, looking for the boy he had spent years protecting in secret. He found nothing but a void. You have touched things you do not understand, Potter, Snape said, his voice a low hiss. The Master of Death is a title for a myth, not a man. Then watch the myth work, Severus, Harry said. Harry raised his left hand, and the stone floor began to ripple like water. I know where it is. The Ravenclaw's diadem, the crown of the wise, turned into a cage for a coward's soul. Harry closed his eyes. The black rift on his forehead flared, and the castle itself seemed to respond. The walls shifted. The room of requirement, 7 floors up, began to bleed its contents through the ceiling of the great hall. Thousands of objects, broken furniture, old books, forgotten relics, fell from the air, hovering in a chaotic, swirling mountain of junk above the house tables. Locate, Harry commanded. The mountain of objects began to incinerate, not with fire, but with a gray, entropic decay. Within seconds, the junk turned to dust, leaving only one object floating in the center of the hall, a silver, eagle-shaped tiara with a brilliant blue stone. The diadem of Ravenclaw. The sole fragment inside the crown realized its end was near. It didn't scream like the cup, it whispered. 1,000 seductive voices filled the hall, promising the students power, beauty, and the return of their lost loved ones. Don't listen to it, Neville Longbottom shouted, standing up and drawing his wand. It's a lie. Harry didn't need the warning. He reached out and grabbed the diadem from the air. The crown turned red hot, the blue stone turning into a vertical, reptilian eye. Shadowy serpents erupted from the silver, biting into Harry's arms, trying to inject the venom of Voldemort's ego into his blood. Harry smiled. It was a cold, terrifying expression. You think I'm a vessel? Harry whispered to the crown. I'm a black hole. He didn't inhale this time. He pressed the diadem against the black rift on his forehead. The impact sent a shockwave through the hall that shattered every window, sending shards of glass raining down like diamonds. A pillar of violet fire erupted from Harry, reaching the enchanted ceiling and turning the simulated sky into a swirling nebula of death. Harry's body levitated, his back arching at an impossible angle. The students watched in horror as the black smoke of the soul fragment was literally torn out of the diadem and sucked into the rift in Harry's skull. The diadem shattered. The silver melted and dripped to the floor like tears of mercury. Harry landed on the stone, his breathing heavy, his eyes now completely void of white, just 2 infinite wells of blackness. He looked at his hands, which were now covered in a faint, shifting pattern of runes that glowed with a dull, necrotic light. 4. Harry panted. He turned his gaze toward the shadows near the entrance. Voldemort was there. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a tattered, gray thing, his physical form failing as he lost anchor after anchor. He was flanked by the last of his inner circle. Bellatrix returned from the veil as a hollow, ghostly husk, Lucius, and the snake, Nagini. You monster. Voldemort hissed, his voice trembling. You are eating your own soul to get to mine. I don't have a soul anymore, Tom, Harry said, stepping toward him. The students scrambled away, forming a wide circle around the two titans. I gave it to the veil in exchange for the truth. And the truth is, you're just a frightened little boy who never learned how to say goodbye. Kill him, Voldemort roared, pointing a shaking finger at Harry. Nagini, kill him. The massive serpent lunged, its fangs dripping with a venom that could melt steel. Harry didn't use a sword. He didn't use a spell. He caught the snake by its head with one hand, his grip crushing the bone instantly. The last anchor, Harry said. He looked Nagini in the eye. The snake thrashed, its tail shattering the stone floor. But Harry was immovable. He leaned in and whispered a single word of power into the snake's ear. Nagini didn't just die, she imploded. The soul fragment inside her was crushed by the sheer weight of Harry's will. The snake's body turned into a black, oily smoke that Harry inhaled in one long, terrifying breath. The power surge was too much. Harry collapsed to one knee, the ground beneath him cratering. The air in the hall became unbreathable, a vacuum of magic that pulled the life force out of everything nearby. Voldemort let out a scream of pure, existential agony. He fell to the floor, his skin turning to ash and blowing away in a wind that didn't exist. He was fading. He was becoming a ghost before he was even dead. It's over, Tom, Harry said, standing up. He was glowing now, a terrifying, angelic radiance of pure death. There's nothing left to hold you here. I will not go. Voldemort shrieked, his voice thin as a reed. I am Lord Voldemort. I have conquered. You've conquered nothing, Harry said. He walked up to the fading Dark Lord and placed a hand on his forehead. I am the Master of the Hallows. I am the King of the White Tomb. And I cast you out. Harry closed his fist. Voldemort didn't die with a bang. He simply ceased to be. The last of his essence was snuffed out like a candle in a void. No body was left behind. Just a handful of gray ash that settled on the floor of the Great Hall. The silence that followed was heavy. The students looked at Harry, but they didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They looked at him with a fear that was deeper than anything they had felt for Voldemort. Harry stood in the center of the hall, the Master of Death, his white hair whipping in the cold wind. He looked at Dumbledore's portrait on the wall. The painted eyes were full of tears. Harry, Hermione whispered, stepping into the circle. She looked at his black eyes, his runic skin, his terrifying power. Is it done? Are we safe? Harry looked at her. He didn't see his friend. He saw a mortal, a fragile, flickering spark of life that would one day go out. Safe? Harry asked, his voice a chorus of 1,000 dead kings. No one is safe, Hermione. But the debt is paid. He looked at the Elder Wand in his hand. He could feel the world waiting for his command. He could feel the dead rising in their graves, waiting for their king to lead them. I have the wand, Harry murmured. I have the stone's dust in my blood. And I have the cloak. He reached into the air and pulled the invisibility cloak from the void. It wasn't a piece of fabric anymore. It was a shroud of pure night. He wrapped it around his shoulders, and he vanished. Not just from sight, but from the world. Harry, Ron shouted, running into the center of the hall. Harry, come back. But there was no answer. The boy who lived was gone. The King of Shadows had taken his throne. And the world began to grow very, very cold. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. The Iron Crown of the World. The aftermath of Voldemort's fall was not a victory, it was a transition. The wizarding world didn't throw parties in the streets of Hogsmeade. They didn't light fireworks over the Thames. Instead, they shuttered their windows and bolted their doors, because the entity that had replaced the Dark Lord was something far more absolute. 3 months had passed since the Great Hall of Hogwarts became the epicenter of a new era. In that time, the Ministry of Magic had ceased to function as a government and had become a skeletal administration of the fearful. Kingsley Shacklebolt, the acting minister, sat in an office that was now perpetually covered in a thin layer of frost. He hasn't made a move in weeks, Kingsley muttered, his voice echoing in the hollowed-out ministry. He looked at the man across from him. Arthur Weasley looked 20 years older, his red hair turned a dull, ash gray. He doesn't need to move, Kingsley, Arthur said softly. He's everywhere. The shadows, they listen to him. I saw a group of snatchers try to flee to France yesterday. They didn't make it to the coast. The ground simply opened up and swallowed them. No spells, no flashes of light, just the earth claiming what was owed. Quote, high above the clouds, atop the highest tower of Hogwarts, which Harry had claimed as his seat, the air didn't move. It was a dead zone. Harry sat on a throne he had transfigured from the very stone of the castle. It wasn't a chair of comfort, it was a jagged, obsidian spire that hummed with the resonance of the ley lines. He wore the invisibility cloak as a permanent mantle, the fabric no longer shimmering but drinking in the light like a black hole. The Elder Wand lay across his knees, and his skin was now a canvas of shifting, violet-black runes that see. Ronick led the names of every soul he had absorbed. He wasn't Harry Potter anymore. He was the Singularity. They're planning to kill you, you know. The voice came from the corner of the room. A shimmering, translucent figure leaned against the wall. It was the ghost of Albus Dumbledore, but he didn't look like the portraits in the hall. He looked like the man Harry had seen in the King's Cross limbo, naked of his titles, fragile and deeply regretful. Let them try, Albus, Harry said. His voice was no longer human. It sounded like the grinding of tectonic plates and the sigh of a winter wind. The light thinks that if they remove the head, the body will fall. They don't realize I am no longer the head. I am the nervous system of this world. You have become the very thing we fought to stop, Dumbledore whispered. The Master of Death was never meant to be a ruler, Harry. It was meant to be a state of grace. To accept the end, not to weaponize it. Harry stood up. The movement caused a tremor that shook the foundations of the castle miles below. Acceptance is for those who are powerless. I saw what happens when we accept things. We accept the death of parents. We accept the torture of friends. We accept a world where a madman can split his soul and hide like a parasite. I have ended the cycle of acceptance and replaced it with a tomb, Dumbledore replied. Harry ignored him. He looked out over the horizon. He could see everything. He saw Ron and Hermione in a safe house in the Forest of Dean, huddled over old books, looking for a way to save him. He saw the survivors of the Order whispering in the dark. He saw the remaining Death Eaters, broken and begging for mercy in the dungeons. He reached out a hand, and the air in front of him rippled. They are coming today, Harry said. The International Confederation of Wizards. They've sent their Inquisitors. They think their collective magic can bind me. Harry, please, Dumbledore's ghost pleaded. If you shed more blood, the anchor you've built out of these souls will drag you into the void forever. You won't be a king. You'll be a prisoner of your own power. I am already a prisoner, Albus. I'm the only one who stayed awake to keep the monsters from the door. A loud, booming crack echoed through the atmosphere. 5 figures appeared in the sky, levitating on discs of pure, white light. They were the archmages of the ICW, sorcerers from the East, the Americas, and Africa. They were draped in robes of enchanted gold and silver, their faces hidden behind masks of ivory. They descended toward the tower, their wands raised in a synchronized formation. Harry Potter, the lead Inquisitor shouted, his voice amplified by a sonorous charm that shook the clouds. By the authority of the Global Magical Council, you were ordered to surrender the Hallows and submit to the Veil. Your existence is a breach of the natural order. Harry didn't reach for his wand. He didn't even stand in a defensive posture. He simply stepped to the edge of the tower. The natural order is a lie told by the weak to make themselves feel safe, Harry said, his voice projecting into the minds of everyone within 100 miles. I am the new order. I am the end of the line. If you wish to see the face of the great beyond, step forward. The Inquisitors didn't hesitate. They were the best the world had to offer. The Y unleashed a combined spell. A Solaris Cage, a massive sphere of white-hot, purifying fire designed to incinerate anything with a trace of dark magic. The sun itself seemed to lend its strength to the spell, turning the sky into a blinding furnace. The cage closed in on Harry. The stone of the tower began to melt, turning into glowing slag. Harry stood in the center of the white fire. He didn't burn. His black cloak absorbed the heat, the shadows beneath its folds expanding to meet the light. He looked at the Inquisitors through the flames, his black eyes pulsing with a rhythmic, violet light. Light is just a delay, Harry murmured. He raised the Elder Wand and traced a circle in the air. Nox Universalis. The sun didn't just go behind a cloud. It vanished. Total, absolute darkness slammed into the world. It wasn't the darkness of night, it was the darkness of the womb and the grave. Every light source on the planet, every candle, every lumos, every street lamp, went out. The Inquisito RS screamed as their discs of light failed. They plummeted through the pitch-black air, unable to see their own hands. Harry didn't let them fall. He caught them in midair with tendrils of shadow that sprouted from the tower. He hauled them back up, slamming them onto the scorched stone at his feet. He restored the sun, but it was dim now, a pale, sickly disk that provided no warmth. The Inquisitors lay on the ground. Their ivory masks shattered. They were gasping, their magical cores drained to the point of collapse. "You call yourselves masters of magic," Harry said, looking down at them. Quote, "But you are just children playing with matches in a house made of dry grass. You want to bind me. You want to put me in a cage." Harry stepped on the hand of the lead Inquisitor. "I have eaten the soul of the man who feared you. I have tasted the void behind the veil. There is no cage in this universe that can hold the one who owns the keys to the exit. You are a devil," the Inquisitor wheezed, his eyes wide with a terror that transcended language. "No," Harry said, "I'm the one who keeps the devils in the dark. Go back to your councils. Tell them that the borders are closed. Tell them that Britain is no longer a country. It is a sanctuary for the dead. And tell them that if they ever send another Inquisitor to my doorstep, I won't just take their light. I'll take their history." He flicked his wand, and the 5 mages were blasted back through the air, disappearing into the horizon in a blur of gray smoke. Harry turned back to the ghost of Dumbledore. The old man was weeping. "It's begun, Albus," Harry said. "The world is afraid, and fear is the only thing that keeps people from killing each other. I will be the monster they all fear together. I will be the peace that comes from total submission." "And who will save you, Harry?" Dumbledore asked. "Who will save the boy who lived?" Harry looked down at his hands. The runes were moving faster now, spiraling up his neck, toward his face. "The boy who lived died in the ministry, Albus. You should know. You're the one who watched him fall." Harry sat back down on his throne. He closed his eyes, and threw the stone of the castle. He felt the heartbeat of the world. It was slow, it was steady, it was terrified, and for the first time since he had touched the veil, Harry Potter felt a cold, hollow satisfaction. "Ron, Hermione," Harry whispered to the empty air. "Stay in the woods. Stay hidden. I'm doing this for you." But in the silence of the tower, the only answer was the wind, and the faint, ghostly sough. End of 1,000 souls screaming in the dark. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. The Tower of Silence. The world didn't end with a bang or a whimper, it ended with a frost that wouldn't melt. It was mid-July, but the Great Lake was a solid sheet of black ice, and the Forbidden Forest had turned into a graveyard of petrified timber. Hogwarts was no longer a school. It was the Iron Citadel, the axis upon which a new, cold world turned. Harry sat in the high solar of the astronomy tower, the Elder Wand floating horizontally before his chest. He was bare-chested, his ribs tracing the outline of a body that no longer required sustenance. The runes on his skin were no longer purple, they were a deep, bruised indigo, pulsing in sync with the heavy, thrumming magic of the castle. "Master," a voice rasped. Harry didn't open his eyes. He didn't have to. He could feel the synaptic firing of every brain within a 10-mile radius. "Speak, Kingsley." Kingsley Shacklebolt stood at the threshold, his once vibrant purple robes now tattered and gray. He looked like a man who had spent a lifetime in Azkaban, though he had only been Harry's liaison for 6 months. "The Resistance has moved," Kingsley said, his voice flat, drained of its old resonance. "They've occupied the ruins of Godric's Hollow. They've found something, Harry. A relic from the Peverell line. They believe it can sever your connection to the Hallows." Harry's eyes snapped open. They were entirely black now, save for a microscopic spark of white in the center that looked like a distant, dying galaxy. "Godric's Hollow," Harry repeated. The name felt like a phantom limb. "They choose the place of my beginning to attempt my end." How poetic. Hermione always did have a flair for the dramatic. "It's not just the Order," Kingsley added, stepping closer. his boots crunching on the frost-covered floor. The survivors of the Death Eaters, the ones who fled to the continent, they've joined them. Lucius Malfoy is providing the funding. They've formed a covenant of the living. They're calling you the Pale King. Harry stood up. The movement was fluid, unnatural. He reached out and snatched the Elder Wand from the air. The living, Harry mused. A ghost of a smirk playing on his marble-white lips. They cling to their heartbeats like their gold coins. They don't realize that life is just the waiting room for my kingdom. Harry, they have the children. Kingsley whispered, his professional veneer cracking. Ron and Hermione. They've gathered the orphans from the war. They're using them as a shield. They know you woe. NT level the village if the innocents are there. The air in the room suddenly solidified. Kingsley was slammed against the wall by a wall of sheer atmospheric pressure. Harry's face shifted, his features stretching as the souls of the Horcruxes within him fought for dominance. They think I still have a weakness for the innocent. Harry's voice was a tectonic roar. They think the power he knows not was love. It wasn't love, Kingsley. It was the ability to suffer more than anyone else. And I have suffered enough to buy the world 10 times over. Harry walked to the edge of the tower. He didn't use a broom. He didn't use a spell. He stepped off the ledge. He didn't fall. The shadows of the castle rose up like a loyal carpet, catching him and forming a swirling platform of darkness. He streaked across the sky. A black comet heading south toward the village where his parents had died. Godric's Hollow was unrecognizable. The church was a fortress, its stained glass replaced by iron plating. Wards of blinding gold light, the combined effort of 100 desperate wizards, shimmered over the graveyard. Harry landed in the center of the village square. The impact shattered the cobblestones, sending a shockwave that blew out the windows of the nearby cottages. Harry, stop right there. Ron Weasley stepped out from behind the statue of Harry's parents. He looked rugged, his face scarred, holding a massive broadsword that glowed with a holy, silver light. Beside him stood Hermione, her hair a wild mane, her hands glowing with a complex, geometric spell array. Look at you, Ron, Harry said, his voice carrying through the village like the tolling of a funeral bell. You've traded your wand for a toothpick. And Hermione, you're trying to use arithmancy to solve a god. It's pathetic. We're not here to fight you, Harry, Hermione cried, her voice breaking. We're here to bring you back. The Hallows, they're a feedback loop. They're eating your memories. You don't even remember the burrow, do you? You don't remember the taste of treacle tart or the way the sun felt on the Quidditch pitch. Harry paused. For a fraction of a second, the indigo runes dimmed. He saw the burrow, a warm, crooked house full of laughter and the smell of baking. He saw Ron's lopsided grin. Then, the cold rushed back. The weight of the 3 souls he had swallowed, the pieces of Tom Riddle, snarled in his gut. I remember the cold of the cupboard under the stairs, Harry said softly. I remember the sound of my mother screaming while the light sat in their towers and did nothing. I remember the weight of the prophecy you all used to chain me. You didn't want a friend. You wanted a weapon. Well, congratulations. The weapon is sentient now. Then you leave us no choice, Ron said, his eyes hardening. He raised the silver sword. For the world that was, Harry. For the world that was, 100 voices echoed from the shadows of the buildings. The covenant struck. It wasn't a duel, it was an execution. 100 different spells, light, dark, elemental, converged on the spot where Harry stood. The square vanished in a blinding pillar of white fire and lightning. The ground turned to lava. The air itself was burned away. When the smoke cleared, Harry was still standing. He was encased in a sphere of rotating, black liquid. The Elder Wand was held high, its tip bleeding a viscous, violet ichor. My turn, Harry said. He slammed the wand into the ground. Exequias. The funeral. The ground didn't explode. It dissolved. From the cracks in the earth, the dead of Godric's Hollow began to rise. Not just the recently buried, but the ancient ones. Knights from the Middle Ages, Victorian ladies, and the victims of the First Wizarding War. They didn't attack with teeth and claws. They attacked with silence. They walked toward the Covenant members, and wherever they passed, magic died. Wands snapped in half. Charms flickered out. The very life force of the living was being drained into the gray tide. Harry, no, the children, Hermione screamed, pointing toward the church. Harry looked. Through the iron-plated windows, he saw the small, terrified faces of the war orphans. They were watching him, not as a hero, but as the monster from their nightmares. Harry felt a pang in his chest, a genuine, human heartbeat. The rift on his forehead bled a single drop of black blood. "Is this what you wanted, Albus?" Harry whispered to the air. He looked at Ron, who was charging at him with the silver sword. Ron's face was a mask of pure, righteous fury. He swung the blade, aiming for Harry's neck. Harry didn't move. The blade struck his skin and shattered like glass. Harry reached out and gripped Ron by the throat, lifting him off the ground. "I could end you with a thought, Ron," Harry said. His black eyes inches from his friend's. "I could turn your blood into lead. I could send your soul to a place where time doesn't exist." "Then do it," Ron wheezed, his hands clawing at Harry's wrist. "Kill me. Become him fully. Because as long as I'm breathing, I'm a reminder of the boy you murdered to get that wand." Harry looked at Ron. He saw the boy who had shared his sandwiches on the train. He saw the man who had stood by him in the forest. With a roar of agony, Harry threw Ron away. He didn't kill him. He sent him crashing through the doors of the church, safe inside the iron walls. Harry turned to the sky and unleashed a scream of pure, unfiltered magical pressure. The clouds were blown away for 100 miles. The rising army of the dead turned to dust instantly. "Leave," Harry roared at the Covenant. "Leave this place. Hide in your holes. The next time I come, I won't be looking for a conversation." Harry turned into a pillar of black fire and vanished, leaving Godric's Hollow in a state of shattered silence. He returned to his tower, collapsing onto his throne. He was shaking. The souls inside him were laughing. Voldemort's voice, cold and high, echoing in his skull. "You cannot kill them, Harry," the ghost of Riddle hissed. "Because if you kill them, there will be no one left to fear you. And without fear, what is a king?" Harry gripped the arms of his throne, his knuckles white. He looked at the Elder Wand. It was vibrating, hungry for more. "I will save them," Harry whispered to the empty room. "Even if I have to break every bone in the world to do it." Outside, the snow began to fall again. But it wasn't white. It was the color of ash. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. The Veins of the Earth. The world was no longer a map of nations, it was a map of echoes. From his throne in the Iron Citadel, Harry could feel the tectonic shifts of magical intent across the globe. The wizarding world had gone underground, literally. Deep beneath the Pyrenees, within the hollowed-out heart of the Appalachian Mountains, and under the salt flats of Australia, the free magic enclaves were flickering like dying embers in a blizzard. Harry didn't care about their politics. He cared about the friction. Every time a wizard cast a spell, it pulled from the same source, the Earth's magical mantle, and Harry was now the gatekeeper of that source. "It's getting harder to breathe, isn't it?" Harry didn't turn. He was standing on the battlements, watching a group of Dementors circle the Quidditch pitch. They didn't attack anymore. They waited for his scraps. The voice belonged to Luna Lovegood. She was the only one who didn't fear him, mostly because she didn't seem to see the monster. She saw the Raxperts that infested his aura. "The air is heavy with the weight of things unsaid." "Luna," Harry replied. His voice was a low vibration that made the stone beneath her feet hum. Luna walked to his side, her blonde hair matted and gray with ash. "Shish." He reached out a hand, a move that would have seen anyone else obliterated, and touched the shifting indigo runes on his forearm. "The soul pieces are fighting, Harry. They're like hungry birds in a cage that's too small," she said dreamily. "You've swallowed the snake, the diary, the locket, the cup, and the crown. But there's a sixth one. The one you missed." Harry's eyes flared. The diary was destroyed in the chamber years ago. The ring was crushed. The others are part of me now. There is nothing left of Tom Riddle but his scream. The ring was crushed, yes, Luna whispered, her eyes fixed on the horizon. But the stone was made of the same stuff as the veil. You didn't destroy the soul fragment inside the ring, Harry. You just let it sink into the ground. It's at the bottom of the world now. And it's growing roots. Harry felt a cold spike of genuine dread. He reached out with his mind, diving deep into the ley lines, past the roots of the mountains, down into the molten core of the planet. There, a pulse, a rhythmic, sickly throb that matched his own heartbeat. The resurrection stone's dust hadn't vanished, it had bonded with the iron in the Earth's core. Voldemort's final, desperate sliver of ego was terraforming the planet from the inside out. He's turning the world into a Horcrux, Harry breathed. He's very clever for a man with no hair, Luna said, patting his arm. You should probably go down there. The Nargles are very agitated. Harry didn't wait. He didn't use the stairs. He became a spear of black light and slammed into the center of the courtyard. The stone didn't just break. It vaporized. Harry continued downward, his body a drill of necrotic energy. He moved through the crust, through the mantle, the pressure increasing until the heat would have melted dragon scale. But Harry was the master of death. Temperature was just a suggestion. He broke into a massive, subterranean geode. The walls were lined with crystals the size of cathedrals, glowing with a pulsing, toxic green. In the center of the chamber, a mass of black, oily tendrils was wrapped around a glowing red core, the heart of the world. From the mass of shadows, a face began to form. It was Tom Riddle, but not the Snake Man. This was the handsome, charming Tom from the diary, his features twisted into a mask of planetary ambition. Harry, the Earth Voldemort boomed, his voice vibrating through the very magma of the planet. You thought you were the only one who could evolve. You ate my fragments, but I became the feast. I am the iron in the blood of every living thing. I am the gravity that holds you down. You're a parasite, Tom, Harry said, leveling the Elder Wand. The wood was white-hot, protesting the sheer amount of power Harry was channeling. You're trying to hold on to a world that already rejected you. The world didn't reject me. It feared me, and now it fears you. We are the same, Harry. Two sides of a coin tossed into the dark. The tendrils lunged. They weren't made of magic. They were made of the Earth's own fury, molten lead and pressurized diamond. Harry dodged, his cloak whipping behind him, leaving trails of violet frost in the superheated air. He fired a curse of absolute zero. The green crystals shattered, the sudden temperature shift causing the cavern to groan. But Voldemort laughed, the sound echoing in the tectonic plates. Why? Oh, you can't kill me without killing the world, Harry. If you strike my heart, the core stops spinning. The atmosphere strips away. The living you claim to protect will freeze in the vacuum. Harry paused. He looked at the black mass. He could feel the truth in the words. Voldemort had laced himself into the life support system of the planet. It was the ultimate hostage situation. I'm not going to strike your heart, Tom, Harry said. His eyes turning a blinding, supernova white. I'm going to finish the meal. Harry threw the Elder Wand aside. It clattered against a crystal, its hum silenced. Harry, no. The ghost of Dumbledore appeared, his form flickering in the heat. If you absorb the core's corruption, there will be nothing left of the boy. You will become a god of stone and ash. The boy is a memory, Albus. Harry roared. He flew forward, burying his hands into the oily black mass. The pain was beyond anything Harry had ever felt. It wasn't physical, it was the sensation of a billion years of geological history being shoved into a human brain. He felt the shifting of continents, the birth of oceans, and the rot of every creature that had ever died and been buried in the soil. Voldemort's ego fought back, trying to drown Harry in a sea of malice. I am the earth, the Dark Lord screamed. Then I am the grave. Harry countered. Harry opened his mouth and began to pull. The black ichor didn't flow into him. It was erased by him. He was a vacuum, a singularity of such intense death energy that the light in the cavern began to bend toward him. The green glow faded. The black tendrils shriveled and were sucked into Harry's pores. The handsome face of Tom Riddle distorted, his eyes widening in a final realization of defeat. You would destroy yourself to stop me. Voldemort's voice was a fading whisper. I'm not destroying myself, Harry panted, his skin cracking as the indigo runes turned into deep, glowing canyons of white fire. I'm just going home. With one final, violent tug, Harry ripped the last of the corruption from the Earth's core. A silent explosion of pure magical force rocked the planet. On the surface, every volcano on Earth erupted simultaneously with harmless silver ash. The tides surged and then settled into a perfect, glassy calm. The frost over Britain vanished, replaced by a soft, ethereal twilight. In the center of the geode, Harry Potter lay on the ground. He was no longer indigo. He was translucent, his body made of shifting smoke and starlight. The black rift on his forehead was gone, replaced by a smooth, unscarred brow. He reached out and picked up the Elder Wand. It felt light. It felt powerless. He stood up and looked at the core of the world. It was glowing with a steady, warm amber light. The infection was gone. Harry flew upward, passing through the crust like a ghost. He emerged in the center of the Great Hall at Hogwarts. It was empty, save for Ron and Hermione, who had been brought there by the sheer gravity of the event. They looked at him, and for the first time in months, they didn't look away in fear. They looked in wonder. Harry, Hermione whispered. Harry looked at his hands. They were fading. The Hallows were returning to the Vale, and they were taking him with them. He had used so much of death's power to save the living that there was no longer enough, Harry, left to stay. I fixed it, Harry said, his voice a soft, melodic chime. The anchors are gone. The world is yours again. But what about you? Ron asked, taking a step forward. You can't just leave, mate. We just got you back. Harry smiled. It wasn't the smile of a king or a monster. It was the smile of the boy who had found his first friends on a train. I'm not leaving, Ron. I'm just stopping. Harry turned into a cloud of white petals that caught a wind no one else could feel. They drifted out of the shattered windows, rising into the sky, joining the stars. The Iron Citadel was gone. The Pale King was a legend. And for the first time in a century, the wizarding world woke up to a sun that didn't feel like a threat. But in the quiet corners of the world, where the shadows linger, they still whisper his name. Not as a savior, and not as a villain, but as the one who walked into the dark so the rest of us could stay in the light. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. The Silent Frontier. The world didn't go back to the way it was. You don't just erase a god and expect the neighbors to start borrowing sugar again. The sun was out, sure, and the ash had stopped falling, but the silence that followed the departure of Harry Potter was louder than any war. 6 months after the White Petals, the wizarding world was a fractured mirror. Without a king to fear, the old greeds had crawled out of their holes. The ministry was trying to re-establish order, which mostly meant hunting down anyone who had bowed to the Pale King. Ron Weasley sat in the Hog's Head, a glass of fire whiskey untouched in front of him. He looked like a man who had seen the end of the movie and didn't like the credits. Beside him, Hermione was buried in a mountain of ancient scrolls, her eyes bloodshot. He's not in the stars, Ron, she whispered. Her voice a jagged edge. I've checked the celestial alignments. I've checked the ley line resonance. When he dissolved, he didn't go to the other side. He got stuck in the plumbing. The plumbing? Ron asked, finally taking a sip. My own, he's gone. He saved the world and he checked out. That's the story. That's what we tell the kids. No, she snapped, shoving a parchment toward him. Look at the magic usage spikes. Every time someone casts a high-level Patronus or a killing curse, there's a localized vacuum. Something is absorbing the overflow. Harry didn't leave. He became the atmosphere. A cold draft swept through the pub, though the door remained shut. The shadows in the corners didn't just sit there, they leaned in. You're right to look for me, Hermione. But you won't like what you find. The voice didn't come from a person. It came from the wood of the table, the glass in their hands, and the air in their lungs. Ron jumped, his hand going to a wand. He felt suddenly like a dead stick of wood. Harry, Ron croaked. The shadows behind the bar swirled, knitting together into a shape. It wasn't the glowing, starlight entity from the Great Hall. It was a silhouette, a void in the shape of a man, wearing a crown of thorns made of frozen smoke. I couldn't cross over, the shadow Harry said. His form was unstable, flickering like a bad transmission. Voldemort's soul pieces. They didn't just vanish when I inhaled them. They bonded to the Peverell blood. I'm a walking graveyard, and the Vale won't let me in until the ledger is balanced. Balanced how? Hermione asked, her fear replaced by a desperate, academic hunger. We destroyed the anchors. The world is clean. The world is never clean, Harry said, and for a second, his face flickered into view, pale, exhausted. And terrifyingly ancient. The ministry is building something, Ron. Underneath the old Department of Mysteries. They're trying to build their own veil. They want to weaponize the overflow. I'm holding back. Kingsley wouldn't do that, Ron said, though his voice lacked conviction. Kingsley isn't in charge anymore, Harry hissed, the shadows in the room spiking like obsidian needles. The Committee of Magical Stability is. They've found the Elder Wand, Ron. It didn't vanish. It just waited for a hand that was greedy enough to pick it up. Who has it? Hermione breathed. Someone who thinks the Pale King was an amateur, Harry said. The windows of the Hog's Head shattered outward. A squad of stabilizers, wizards in chrome-masked robes, hit the floor in perfect formation. They didn't use wands. They used metallic gauntlets that hummed with a familiar, sickly violet light. By order of the committee, the lead stabilizer boomed, "You are under arrest for onsorting with a Class 5 necrotic entity." Ron stood up, his chair clattering back. He's not an entity. He's Harry Potter. Harry Potter is a myth, the stabilizer said, raising his gauntlet. This is just a stain on the rug. The gauntlet unleashed a pulse of anti-magic, a gray ripple that turned the air into lead. Ron and Hermione collapsed, their magical cores feeling like they'd been hit by a sledgehammer. The shadow Harry roared, a sound that wasn't a noise but a psychic scream that knocked the glasses off the shelves. He lunged at the stabilizers, but as he passed through the gray ripple, his form began to tear. He wasn't solid. He was a ghost made of raw power, and the committee had found the frequency to unravel him. "Go!" Harry screamed at Ron and Hermione, his shadow form stretching and snapping like a rubber band. "Go to the coast. Find the third brother's grave. It's the only place they can't see. We're not leaving you again." Ron yelled, reaching for Harry's flickering hand. "You're not leaving me," Harry said, his eyes flashing with a final, desperate light. "You're going to get the only weapon that can kill a god." Harry exploded, not in blood, but in a wave of absolute darkness that blinded the stabilizers and leveled the building. When the dust settled, the pub was a crater. Ron and Hermione were gone, vanished into the woods by a last-second burst of Harry's will. The lead stabilizer stood up, brushing splinters of wood from his chrome mask. He looked down at the Elder Wand gripped in his gauntlet. The wood was screaming, its surface covered in tiny, bleeding cracks. "The entity has dispersed," the stabilizer said into a communication rune on his wrist. "But the resonance remains. Begin Phase 2. We're going to Godric's Hollow. We're going to dig up the source." Deep in the Forest of Dean, Ron and Hermione hit the damp earth, gasping for air. The silence of the woods felt like a trap. "He's still here," Ron whispered, looking at his shaking hands. "He's still fighting." "He's not fighting a war, Ron," Hermione said, looking at the gray, lifeless sky. "He's fighting the vacuum. And if we don't find that grave, the vacuum is going to win." In the distance, the sound of 1,000 metallic wings began to rise. The committee was moving. The hunt for the Master of Death had shifted from the living to the dead. And in the center of the void, Harry Potter felt the first piece of his mind begin to snap. The hunger was coming back. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Bone Garden. The coast of Cornwall didn't welcome visitors, it endured them. The Atlantic crashed against the jagged cliffs with a violence that mirrored the chaos in the stars. Ron and Hermione stood at the edge of a forgotten cemetery, tucked into a cleft of rock where the alt spray turned the headstones into smooth, featureless teeth. "This is it," Hermione whispered, her voice barely audible over the gale. She held a compass that didn't point north, but spun frantically toward the center of the earth. The resting place of Ignotus Peverell. The third brother. The one who walked with death as an equal and then laid down his life like an old friend. Ron looked around at the desolate, weed-choked yard. It doesn't look like much for a guy who started the mess we're in. He didn't start the mess, Ron. He was the only one who knew how to end it, Hermione said. He knelt before a slab of slate that was cracked down the middle. There were no names, only the faded carving of a triangle, a circle, and a line. Suddenly, the air turned static. The grass beneath their feet didn't just bend. It withered to black ash in a perfect circle around the grave. A silhouette bled out of the gray fog, a man-shaped hole in the universe. Harry was worse than he had been at the pub. His form was a chaotic swirl of obsidian smoke, and through the translucence of his chest, Ron could see 5 distinct orbs of sickly green light, the soul fragments of Voldemort, pulsing like angry parasites. They're eating me, Harry's voice rasped, sounding like two stones grinding together. The committee's weapons. They broke the seals I built. The fragments are waking up. Harry, hold on, Ron said, reaching out, but his hand passed through Harry's shoulder as if it were cold steam. I can't, Harry groaned. His face flickered, momentarily shifting into the snake lick visage of the Dark Lord before snapping back. The Elder Wand, the one the committee has, it's not just a wand anymore. They've fed it the blood of the stability prisoners. It's a siphon. It's pulling the death energy out of me and leaving only the rot. We're going to open the grave, Harry, Hermione said, her fingers flying through a series of complex somatic gestures. The cloak was the only hallow that didn't bring a curse. Ignotus didn't want power. He wanted a way to hide from the inevitable. There's a resonance here, a true silence. If we can get you inside the burial chamber, it might act as a Faraday cage for your magic. It's a trap, Hermione, a new voice boomed. From the cliffs above, a dozen silver-winged gliders descended. The stabilizers had arrived. At their lead was a man in a white robe. His face uncovered. It was Lucius Malfoy, but his eyes were replaced by glowing violet gems, and his right arm was fused to the Elder Wand with a mesh of living silver wire. The committee thanks you for the navigation, Miss Granger, Lucius sneered. His voice was amplified by the wand, echoing across the cliffs like thunder. The Pale King is a resource we can no longer allow to go to waste. His essence will power the new world for 1,000 years. You're a lapdog, Lucius. Ron shouted, stepping in front of the flickering shadow of Harry. You're selling the world to a bunch of bureaucrats. I am securing the future, Lucius countered. He raised the Elder Wand. The cracks in the wood bled a neon violet ichor. Reducto. The spell wasn't a bolt, it was a localized collapse of space. The ground in front of Ron and Hermione imploded. They were thrown backward, slamming into the ancient headstones. Harry let out a scream that wasn't human. The 5 green BS in his chest flared with a blinding intensity. The shadows around him expanded, turning into massive, oily tentacles that lashed out at the stabilizers. Tom, stop, Harry gasped, clutching his own head. The tentacles weren't under his control. The Horcruxes were using his body as a battery to wage their own war. One of the tentacles caught a stabilizer in midair and literally squeezed the color out of him, leaving a gray, desiccated husk that shattered when it hit the rocks. See, Lucius laughed, his violet eyes glowing with madness. He is a plague, a necrotic infection. Stabilizers, engage the null field. The silver-winged soldiers formed a circle around the graveyard. They touched their gauntlets together, and a dome of gray, light-eating energy slammed down over the area. Inside the dome, gravity tripled. Hermione gasped, her lungs feeling like they were being crushed. Harry fell to his knees. The shadow matter that made up his body began to leak into the soil, being pulled, led out of him by the Elder Wand's siphon. The grave, Harry choked out, looking at Hermione. Open it. Now. Hermione crawled toward the slate slab, her nose bleeding from the pressure. She didn't use a spell. She used her own blood, tracing the symbol of the Hallows on the stone. Ignotus, she whispered. The traveler returns. Open the door for your kin. The ground didn't shake, it simply ceased to be solid. The slate slab dissolved into a pool of liquid shadow. No, Lucius roared, unleashing a torrent of violet fire from the Elder Wand. The fire hit the null field and reflected, turning the interior of the dome into a furnace of magical radiation. Ron grabbed Harry's flickering arm. It felt like sticking his hand into a freezer. Jump, Harry, move. With a final, desperate surge of will, Harry threw himself into the liquid shadow of the grave. Ron and Hermione tumbled in after him just as the violet fire consumed the spot where they had been standing. They fell through a void of total, absolute silence. There was no wind, no sound of the ocean, no scent of salt. They landed on a floor of smooth, warm white stone. The chamber was small, circular, and lit by a soft, amber GL. That seemed to come from the walls themselves. In the center lay a simple stone sarcophagus. No gold, no jewels. Just a man sleeping in the dark. Harry lay on the floor, his form stabilizing. The 5 green orbs in his chest had dimmed, suppressed by the aura of the room. He looked human again. Pale, thin, and covered in the indigo runes, but human. "We're safe," Ron panted, checking his limbs. "I can't hear the ocean. I can't hear anything." "This is the true silence," Hermione said, standing up and approaching the sarcophagus. "The Hallows were pieces of a whole, Ron. The wand was the ego. The stone was the memory. But the cloak was the soul. This place is the heart of the cloak's power. It's a place where death can't find you, because you're already part of him." Harry stood up shakily. He walked to the sarcophagus and placed his hand on the lid. "He's been waiting," Harry whispered. The lid of the sarcophagus slid open without a sound. Inside lay the skeletal remains of Ignotus Peveril. But he wasn't holding a weapon. His bony hands were folded over a small, silver hourglass filled with black sand. "The Chronos anchor," Harry murmured. "The Hallows weren't meant to make someone a god. They were meant to be a reset button." "A reset?" Ron asked. "The legend says the brothers met death on a road," Harry said, his eyes fixed on the hourglass. "But death isn't a person. It's an entropy. The Hallows were tools to manage that entropy. If the world gets too dark, if the master becomes the monster, the sand is turned." "Harry, if you turn that," Hermione said, her voice trembling. "What happens to you? What happens to us?" "The timeline heals," Harry said. "The moment I touched the veil, it never happens. Sirius stays behind the line. Voldemort dies at the hands of a boy who was just a boy. But I won't remember you. And you won't remember me as anything other than a classmate. A world where you're just Harry?" Ron asked, a small smile breaking through his fear. That sounds like a win, mate." A violent tremor shook the chamber. The white stone walls began to crack. A violet light bled through the fissures. "They're breaking in," Harry said, his voice cold and flat. "The Elder Wand is trying to eat the silence." Harry picked up the silver hourglass. He looked at Ron and Hermione. For the first time in what felt like 1,000 years, his emerald eyes were clear. No white sparks, no black voids. Just the boy who lived. "Thank you," Harry said, "for not letting me go." "Harry, wait," Hermione cried. "Is there no other way? The debt has to be paid, Hermione. And I'm the only one with the currency." Harry flipped the hourglass. The black sand didn't fall. It rose. It spiraled out of the glass, filling the room with a cloud of midnight dust. The violet cracks in the walls vanished. Ron and Hermione began to fade, their forms turning into white light. "See you on the train, Harry," Ron said, his voice echoing from a distance. Harry stood alone in the chamber as the white stone dissolved into a blinding, silent void. He felt the souls of Voldemort being torn out of him, screaming as they were erased from existence. He felt the runes on his skin peel away like dry leaves. Then, there was only the sound of a fluttering veil and a soft, familiar voice. "Good job, pup." Harry closed his eyes and let the light take him. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11. The Weaving of the Void. The white void wasn't a place, it was a pause. It was the space between heartbeats, the static between radio stations. Harry stood in the center of the nothingness. But he wasn't the King of Shadows anymore. He was 17 again, wearing the oversized, hand-me-down clothes of Dudley Dursley, his glasses held together by a prayer and a bit of sellotape. But the hourglass was still in his hand. The black sand was still rising, spiraling around him like a DNA strand made of carbon and crushed stars. "You can't just undo it, Harry." Harry turned. Albus Dumbledore was there, but he wasn't a ghost or a memory. He was vibrant, his robes a deep, regal plum, his eyes twinkling with a terrifyingly clear intelligence. This was the Dumbledore of Harry's prime, the architect. The weaver. "The sand doesn't erase time, Harry," Dumbledore said, walking through the white void as if it were a manicured garden. "It merely folds it. You were trying, to create a world where you never touched the veil, but the veil has already touched you. You were a stain on the tapestry that won't wash out." "I have to try," Harry said, his voice cracking. "The committee, the Horcruxes in my blood. The world is rotting because I tried to save it. If I turn this back, Ron and Hermione get to live. Sirius gets to grow old. And what happens to the Master of Death?" Dumbledore asked, stopping inches from him. "If the timeline resets, the power you've collected has nowhere to go. It won't vanish. It will seek a host. And without you to cage it, it will find someone far less disciplined. The white void suddenly shuddered. A jagged, violet rift tore through the ceiling of the nothingness. The Elder Wand, the one Lucius Malfoy held in the world above, was literalizing itself in the void. It looked like a charred, skeletal finger, reaching down to reclaim its master. The committee is drilling into the afterlife, Harry, Dumbledore warned. They've used the Elder Wand to bridge the gap. They don't want the silence. They want the source code. Harry looked at the hourglass. The black sand was starting to slow down. The reset was failing because the now was fighting back. Then I won't reset it, Harry whispered. His emerald eyes hardened. I'll override it. Harry gripped the hourglass and crushed it in his bare palm. The glass shattered, and the black sand didn't rise anymore. It coated his skin, sinking into his pores. The indigo runes didn't return. Instead, his entire body began to glow with a dull, matte blackness. He wasn't the King of Shadows. He was the shadow itself. Harry, if you do this, there is no coming back. Dumbledore shouted over the rising roar of the void. You will be the bridge. You will be the thing that keeps the two worlds apart forever. I've been a bridge my whole life, Albus. Harry roared. Between the Dursleys and the wizards. Between Voldemort and the living. This is just the final span. Harry reached up and grabbed the violet rift. With a surge of pure, entropic strength, he pulled. He didn't fall out of the void. He erupted back into the world. He was back in the Bone Garden on the Cornish coast. The Nullfield Dome was still there, but it was cracking under the pressure of what was emerging. Lucius Malfoy stood before him, the Elder Wand glowing with a blinding, toxic light. There he is, Lucius screamed, his violet gem eyes spinning in their sockets. The source, stabilizers, harvest him. The silver-winged soldiers lunged, their gauntlets humming. Harry didn't move. He didn't use the Elder Wand. He simply exhaled. A wave of absolute stillness rolled out from him. The stabilizers didn't die. They froze in midair. Their wings stopped flapping, their gauntlets stopped humming, and the very atoms of their bodies ceased to vibrate. They became statues of gray ash, caught in a moment of eternal pursuit. Harry looked at Lucius. The Elder Wand in Malfoy's hand was screaming, trying to pull itself toward Harry like a magnet. You wanted the Master of Death, Lucius, Harry said. His voice was no longer a chorus. It was a singular, terrifying whisper that sounded like the end of a long conversation. But you forgot one thing. Death doesn't work for a committee. Harry walked toward him. Every step he took caused the grass to turn to silver dust. The Nullfield Dome shattered like glass, the shards evaporating before they hit the ground. Lucius fired a curse, a beam of pure, distilled soul energy. Harry reached out and caught the beam. He didn't absorb it. He chewed on it. He literally pulled the magic into his mouth and swallowed it, his eyes flashing with a cold, predatory hunger. My turn to stabilize, Harry said. He pointed a finger at Lucius. Reductio ad nihilum. Reduced to nothing. It wasn't a messy death. Lucius Malfoy simply began to unspool. His robes, his skin, his memories, and the silver wire fusing him to the wand. It all turned into fine, white threads that drifted away in the wind. Within seconds, the man was gone. Only the Elder Wand remained, floating in the air. Harry reached out and gripped the wand. The moment his skin touched the wood, the cracks healed. The violet ichor turned into a steady, pulsing emerald light. He was whole. The wand, the stone, now blood mixed in his veins, and the cloak, the soul of the grave. Ron and Hermione crawled out from the ruins of the sarcophagus, staring at him. They didn't see a friend, and they didn't see a monster. They saw a fundamental force of nature. Harry, Hermione whispered. Harry looked at them. He could see their lifespans stretching out before them like golden threads. He could see the moment they would die, and he could see the peace that waited for them on the other side. The committee is still in London, Harry said. They have a machine. They're trying to build a permanent door to the veil. If they succeed, the concept of end will cease to exist. People will stop dying, but they'll stop living, too. They'll just persist. We have to stop them, Ron said, standing up and wiping blood from his lip. How do we get to London? The flow is blocked and the apparition wards are city-wide. Harry looked at the horizon. He could see the Ministry of Magic, miles away, glowing with a sickly, artificial light. We don't go to London, Harry said. I'll bring London here. Harry raised the Elder Wand to the sky and slashed it downward. The world didn't shake, it shifted. The space between the Cornish cliffs and Whitehall simply vanished. One moment they were standing on a cliffside, the next. The massive, neo-Gothic facade of the Ministry of Magic was sitting in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, the waves crashing against its stone walls. The stability head quarters had been ripped out of the earth and deposited in the Master's arena. Now, Harry said, the emerald light of the wand illuminating the dark sea. Let's see how stable they really are. End of Chapter 11. Chapter 12. The Tides of Whitehall. The Ministry of Magic sat in the Atlantic like a drowning titan. The sea didn't just lap at its foundations, it clawed at them, the salt spray eating in to the ancient enchantments that had once kept the building hidden in the heart of London. Within the Committee of Magical Stability, the alarms weren't ringing, they were screaming in a frantic, dissonant harmony. Harry stood on the surface of the water, his boots leaving ripples of frozen silver on the waves. Behind him, Ron and Hermione stood on a slab of floating marble, their faces masks of pure, adrenaline-fueled disbelief. The architecture of the world is a suggestion, Ron, Harry said, his voice cutting through the roar of the gale. They built their power on the idea that the earth is solid. I'm reminding them that everything eventually flows into the sea. From the upper windows of the Ministry, a barrage of light erupted. Hundreds of stabilizers, their chrome masks reflecting the moonlight, unleashed a coordinated volley of stasis bolts. The sky turned into a grid of gray energy, designed to lock every molecule of the target into a permanent, living stasis. Harry didn't raise a shield. He didn't even lift the Elder Wand. He simply looked at the falling grid and spoke a single syllable in the language of the first fires. Fracture. The gray grid didn't just break, it reversed. The energy of the stasis bolts was sucked into the Elder Wand's tip, turning into a swirling vortex of kinetic force. Harry flicked his wrist, and the vortex slammed into the Ministry's main entrance. The heavy gold-leafed doors, the ones that had stood for centuries, didn't shatter. They were transfigured into 1,000 iron crows that flew upward, screaming, and began to tear at the stabilizers on the balconies. We go in, Harry commanded. The trio didn't walk. The water itself rose up in a massive, tidal surge, carrying them through the shattered entrance and into the atrium. The atrium was no longer the grand hall of the Ministry. The committee had turned it into a factory. Massive, copper-coiled machines hummed with a terrifying frequency, drawing power from a central, swirling rift of gray mist, a man-made veil. Thousands of transparent tubes ran from the machines into the lower levels, siphoning the overflow of the dead. They're harvesting the departed, Hermione whispered, her eyes wide with horror as she watched a ghostly form, a grandmother, perhaps, being pulled through a tube and condensed into a glowing, violet battery cell. They're using souls as fuel. Not for long, Ron growled, his hand tightening on a discarded stabilizer gauntlet he'd scavenged. Identify. A voice boomed from the central dais. A man stepped out of the steam. He wasn't wearing a mask. He was dressed in a sharp, Muggle-style suit of slate gray, his hair slicked back. This was Corbin Yaxley, the former Death Eater who had found a new career in stability. In his hand, he held a staff topped with a fragment of the shattered prophecy orb. Potter, Yaxley sneered, you're late. We've already reached 80% saturation. By dawn, the concept of the afterlife will be a subsidiary of the committee. No more grief, no more loss, just a perpetual, efficient present. You're turning the world into a waiting room for a doctor who never arrives, Harry said. He stepped forward, the indigo runes on his neck glowing with a rhythmic, pulsing light. You think you can cage the end of the story. You think death is a resource. It's the only resource that never runs out. Yaxley shouted. He slammed his staff onto the floor. Activate the null singularity. The massive copper coils began to spin. The man-made veil in the center of the room didn't just pulse, it began to scream. A vacuum of such intense magical pressure was created that Ron and Hermione were nearly pulled off their feet. The air was sucked out of the room, replaced by a freezing, necrotic vacuum. Harry felt the pull. The 5 Horcrux fragments still bonded to his marrow began to vibrate, trying to leap out of his chest and join the artificial void. Harry, it's pulling you apart, Hermione screamed, her voice thin in the lack of air. Harry slammed the Elder Wand into the floor. He didn't fight the vacuum, he fed it. You want the master. Harry's voice was a roar of white noise. Take the whole thing. Harry let go of the seals on his own power. The black, smoky essence of his form erupted, filling the atrium. He became a hurricane of necrotic energy, spiraling into the machines. The copper coils began to glow white-hot, then melt. The transparent tubes shattered, releasing thousands of trapped souls who swirled around the room like a blizzard of light. Yaxley laughed, even as his own skin began to peel from the pressure. Yes, feed it. You're just a battery, Potter. A god-tier battery for our new world. I'm not the fuel, Yaxley, Harry gasped, his face a mask of sweating marble. I'm the fuse. Harry reached into the core of his own being, finding that tiny, stubborn spark of the boy who lived, the one Dumbledore said was a stain that wouldn't wash out. He took that spark of humanity and shoved it into the center of the dark energy he was pouring into the machine. Magic and matter collided. The atrium didn't explode, it imploded. The man-made veil turned from gray to a blinding, celestial gold as Harry's sacrifice of his own power overloaded the system. The machines groaned, the metal warping into the shapes of weeping faces, before they simply disintegrated into fine, silver dust. The vacuum snapped shut. Silence returned to the ministry, broken only by the sound of the Atlantic Ocean pouring through the cracks in the walls. Yaxley lay on the floor, his suit in tatters. His eyes wide as he watched his stability crumble. The souls he had harvested were no longer batteries, they were a shimmering aurora borealis, rising through the ceiling and returning to the true veil. Harry stood in the center of the wreckage. He looked diminished. The indigo runes were gone, replaced by thin, white scars that looked like lightning strikes. His skin was no longer translucent. But he looked older, a man who had carried the weight of the horizon and finally set it down. He looked at his hand. The Elder Wand was gone. It had burned up in the overload, its purpose as a lightning rod for the end of the world finally complete. It's over, Harry whispered. Not yet, Ron said, pointing toward the elevators. The doors slid open. A woman stepped out. She was dressed in simple, white robes, her face serene. Her eyes the color of a clear summer sky. It was Delphine, the secret daughter of Bellatrix and Voldemort, the final contingency the committee had kept in the basement. She wasn't holding a wand. She was holding a small, black stone, the true resurrection stone, reformed from the dust Harry had crushed. The king is dead, Delphine said, her voice a melodic, terrifying chime. Long live the queen. Quote, she raised the stone, and the shadows in the room, the ones that had served Harry, began to turn toward her, their loyalty shifting to the blood of the father. Harry stood his ground, even without his wand. You're a legacy of a dead dream, Delphine. The stone won't save you. The stone won't save me, Harry Potter, she smiled, and the air around her began to rot. But it will bring back the only man you ever truly feared. She turned the stone 3 times in her hand. The shadows didn't just move, they solidified. In the center of the ruined atrium, a figure began to rise from the floor. It wasn't the Snake Man. It wasn't the handsome Tom Riddle. It was something else, a composite of every nightmare the wizarding world had ever had. Voldemort was back, but this time, he wasn't a man. He was a ghost with a physical weight, his eyes 2 burning pits of green fire. Harry, the revenant Voldemort hissed. Did you miss me? Harry looked at his friends, then at the monster. He felt the cold salt water rising around his ankles. He had no wand, no Hallows, and no magic left in his veins. Ron, Hermione, Harry said softly, his eyes never leaving Voldemort. Get out of here. This part is personal. End of Chapter 12. Chapter 13. The Revenant's Reckoning. The atrium was a cathedral of glass and brine. The Atlantic Ocean was no longer just leaking in. It was claiming the ministry, pouring down the elevator shafts in thunderous, white-capped falls. Harry stood knee-deep in the rising tide, his breath hitching in the freezing air. He was a man stripped of his godhood. A king without a crown, facing the physical manifestation of his own trauma. The Revenant Voldemort didn't just occupy the space, it distorted it. Its form was a she-ing mass of black smoke and calcified bone, held together by the raw, desperate power of the resurrection stone in Delphine's hand. The green fire in its eyes illuminated the floating debris, shredded files, broken desks, and the chrome masks of fallen stabilizers. "You look small, Harry," Voldemort hissed, the voice echoing from the walls and the water simultaneously. No runes, no cloak, no deathstick to hide behind. Just a boy shivering in the dark. "I've always been just a boy, Tom," Harry said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "That was the part you could never kill." Delphine laughed, a high-pitched sound that cut through the roar of the water. She stood on a floating piece of the central dais, the stone glowing with a necrotic, oily light. "The world is tired of boys, Potter. It wants a god that stays. My father will bridge the gap that you were too weak to hold." She raised the stone. "Father, end him. Erase the boy who lived so the man who conquers can begin." Voldemort lunged. He didn't move like a wizard. He moved like a shadow serpent, a blur of obsidian mist that slammed into Harry with the force of a train. Harry was thrown backward, crashing through the mahogany remains of a reception desk. The salt water filled his lungs as he went under, the cold a physical weight trying to pull him into the dark. Harry kicked toward the surface, gasping for air as he broke through. Before he could wipe the salt from his eyes, a hand made of cold, gray smoke gripped his throat and lifted him out of the water. Voldemort's face was inches from his, a lipless, terrifying mask of ancient hatred. "I felt you eating them, Harry. My pieces. My soul. I felt your teeth on my essence. How did it taste? Did it taste like the power you always craved?" Harry grabbed Voldemort's wrist. It felt like grabbing a pillar of dry ice. "It tasted like ash, Tom. It tasted like a man who was so afraid of the dark that he burned his own house down to light it." Voldemort's grip tightened. "And now you have nothing. No wand to save you. No mother's sacrifice to shield you. Just the silence." "Harry." Ron's voice cut through the chaos. From a crumbling balcony above, Ron and Hermione were desperately trying to stabilize a heavy, brass chandelier that was dangling by a single enchanted chain. "The stone, Harry," Hermione screamed. "It's the anchor. Without the stone, he's just an echo." Delphine looked up, snarling. She pointed a hand at the balcony, and a lash of violet energy tore through the stone railing. "Be quiet, blood traitor. Your friend is already dead." Harry struggled against Voldemort's grip, his vision beginning to swim. He didn't have magic, but he had something Voldemort never understood, the collective memory of every person who had ever fought back. He reached into his pocket and his fingers brushed the jagged, broken remains of the silver hourglass from the Bone Garden. A single shard of the Chronos anchor. It still hummed with a faint, dying resonance of the reset. "You're right, Tom," Harry wheezed, his face turning a bruised purple. "I don't have a wand. But I still have the time." Harry slammed the glass shard into Voldemort's chest, straight into the hollow space where a heart should have been. The reaction was instantaneous. The reset energy inside the shard didn't turn back time for the world, but it forced Voldemort's revenant form to revert. The smoke began to unspool. The bone began to liquefy. For a split second, the monster flickered back into the shape of a screaming, terrified infant, the same one Harry had seen in the white void of King's Cross. Voldemort let out a shriek of pure, existential horror as his power collapsed. He dropped Harry into the water. "Now!" Harry shouted, his voice a raw command. Ron and Hermione didn't hesitate. They unleashed a combined reducto on the chandelier's support. The massive brass fixture, tons of metal and enchanted crystal, plummeted through the air. It didn't hit Voldemort. It hit the water directly in front of Delphine, creating a massive, localized shockwave. The force of the impact threw her off her feet. The resurrection stone flew from her hand, arching through the air like a falling star. Harry dived. He moved through the rising water, his eyes locked on the black stone. He could see the silhouettes of the dead trapped inside it, his parents, Sirius, Remus, Fred. They weren't smiling. They were waiting. He caught the stone in midair. The moment his fingers touched the black surface, the world went silent. The roar of the ocean, the screams of Delphine, the hissing of Voldemort, it all vanished. Harry was standing in a field of gray tall grass, under a sky of permanent twilight. His mother and father were there. They looked young, beautiful, and heartbreakingly real. "Harry," Lily said, her voice like a warm breeze. "You've gone so far, My brave boy. I have to destroy it, Harry said, the stone vibrating in his hand. If I keep it, I stay the king. If I break it, I'm just me. And I don't know if me is enough to stop them. You were always enough, Harry, James said, placing a ghostly hand on his shoulder. The Hallows were a test of character, not a test of strength. You've already won. But Voldemort, he's right there. He's coming back. He's a ghost who refuses to leave the party, Harry, Lily smiled sadly. Remind him that the sun is coming up. The vision shattered. Harry was back in the ministry. The water was now at chest height. Voldemort had regained his smoky form, and he was lunging through the waves, his hands reaching for the stone. Delphine was scrambling through the debris, her face a mask of primal rage. Harry looked at the resurrection stone. He didn't turn it 3 times. He didn't ask for a memory. He placed the stone on the surface of the rising water and raised his fist. I am Harry James Potter, he whispered, and I am not afraid to end. He slammed his fist down, crushing the resurrection stone against the water with a strength that came from every soul he had ever saved. The stone didn't break, it dissolved. It turned into a pillar of pure, white light that erupted from the water, RCing through the ceiling of the ministry, through the depths of the Atlantic, and straight into the morning sky. The light didn't burn, it invited. Every ghost, every revenant, every echo of Voldemort was caught in the light. They weren't being destroyed, they were being pulled home. The man-made door to the veil was finally closed, replaced by a natural, inevitable bridge. Voldemort let out one final, long-drawn-out hiss of, no. As the light stripped away his smoke and his bone, leaving only a puff of gray ash that was instantly washed away by the salt water. Delphine screamed as the light touched her, the stolen magic of the committee being sucked out of her skin. She collapsed into the water, just another girl lost in a storm. The white light faded. The ministry was a tomb of silent water. The machines were gone. The committee was gone. Harry floated in the center of the atrium, holding onto a piece of floating timber. He looked up at the hole in the ceiling. For the first time in years, he could see the actual sun. It was a pale, cold January sun, but it was real. Ron and Hermione swam over to him, their faces covered in soot and salt, but their eyes were bright with IFE that no stability could ever provide. Is it done? Ron asked, his voice shaking from the cold. The anchors are gone, Ron, Harry said, looking at his scarred, empty hands. The stone is dust, the wand is ash, and the cloak is just a memory. We're just us again, Hermione asked, a tear tracing a path through the salt on her cheek. Harry looked at the ruins of the wizarding world's heart. He felt the cold, he felt the exhaustion, and he felt the crushing weight of everything he had lost. Yeah, Harry said, a tired, genuine smile touching his lips. We're just us. But as they drifted toward the surface, leaving the submerged ministry behind, the water around Harry's hand shimmered for a split second, a faint, indigo glow that refused to completely die. The master was gone, but the shadow always remains. End of Chapter 13. Chapter 14. The Ashen Shore. The Atlantic did not let go easily. It took 3 days for the currents to spit the survivors onto the rugged, grey coastline of Western Ireland. The Ministry of Magic was a drowned secret now, a tomb of marble and copper miles beneath the waves. The world above was silent, but it was a different kind of silence, not the frozen vacuum of the Pale King, but the heavy, exhausted quiet of a fever that had finally broken. Harry lay on the freezing sand, his fingers digging into the grit. Every muscle in his body felt like it had been shredded and stitched back together with rusted wire. His magic was gone, not suppressed, not blocked, but emptied. He was a dry well. Beside him, Ron and Hermione were huddled together under a tattered, waterlogged blanket they'd scavenged from a washed-up trunk. Ron's breathing was a wet rattle. Hermione was staring at the horizon with eyes that had seen the blueprint of the universe and didn't like the design. We're alive, Ron croaked, his voice like grinding gravel. Tell me we're alive, my own. The nerves are screaming, Ron. That's the only proof we get, she whispered. Harry pushed himself up, his vision blurred. Where the indigo runes had once pulsed on his skin, there were now only pale, jagged scars, relics of a power that had tried to turn him into a monument. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. The Master of Death couldn't even hold a handful of sand steady. "It's not over," Harry said. His voice was thin, stripped of its tectonic resonance. "Harry, the stone is gone. Voldemort is ash," Hermione said, turning to look at him. "The committee is under 10,000 tons of seawater. What's left to fight?" "The vacuum," Harry said, pointing to the sky. Even in the daylight, the stars were visible. They weren't twinkling. They were bleeding. The massive release of energy from the destruction of the man-made veil had left a localized tear in the fabric of the world. It was a wound in reality, centered right over the British Isles. It was pulling the color out of the grass, the warmth out of the sun, and the hope out of the air. "The Hallows were the stitches," Harry explained, his voice gaining a desperate edge. "The wand, the stone, the cloak, they were the anchors that kept the two worlds from colliding. I destroyed them to stop the monsters, but now the door is off its hinges." Quote, "So we fix it," Ron said, trying to stand and failing. "We're the Golden Trio, right? We fix things. You can't fix a void with a mending charm, Ron," a new voice drifted across the dunes. Luna Lovegood was walking toward them. She looked untouched by the storm. She wore a coat made of patchwork kelp and carried a jar of glowing blue fireflies. Behind her, a small group of survivors followed: Neville, Ginny, and a handful of students who had hidden in the room of requirement. "The Nargles have all left," Luna said, her voice airy yet heavy with omen. Quote, "They don't like the taste of the nothingness. The world is leaking, Harry. And the only thing that can plug the hole is the thing that caused it." Harry looked at the shadow on the horizon, the darkening rift in the sky. He felt a familiar pull in his marrow. Even without his magic, his blood was still Peverell blood. He was still the third brother's heir. "I have to go back to the source," Harry said. "Hogwarts. Hogwarts is a ruin, Harry," Ginny said, stepping forward. Her face was hard, her eyes mourning a brother she hadn't seen since the world turned cold. "The Carrows, the war, the Pale King's reign. There's nothing left but the bones of the castle." "Then I'll talk to the bones," Harry said. The journey to the Highlands was a march through a dying dream. The wizarding villages they passed were ghost towns. Magic was failing everywhere. Wands were becoming nothing more than sticks. Potions were turning into foul-smelling water. The stability of the committee had been a lie. But the chaos of the vacuum was a death sentence. They reached the gates of Hogwarts at sunset. The winged boars were toppled. The great hall was a skeletal ribcage of stone. Harry walked into the center of the courtyard. Where he had once faced the Dark Lord, where he had once claimed the crown of the world. The air here was thin, freezing. The rift in the sky was directly overhead, a swirling vortex of gray mist that looked exactly like the veil in the Department of Mysteries. "Harry Potter," a voice echoed from the stones. It wasn't a ghost. It was the castle itself. The magic of 1,000 years, concentrated in the foundations, was speaking through the vibrations of the floor. "You took the power of the end," the castle rumbled. "You ate the shards of the soul. You broke the circle. Now, the debt of the Hallows must be paid in full. I don't have them anymore." Harry shouted into the wind. "The wand is ash. The stone is dust. The cloak is a ghost. The Hallows were never objects, Harry," the castle replied. "They were choices. The wand was the choice of power. The stone was the choice of regret. The cloak was the choice of acceptance. You have made all three. You are the Hallow." Harry felt his heart stop. Literally. The rhythmic thumping in his chest ceased, replaced by a cold, steady hum. His skin began to glow again, not with the violet of the Pale King, but with a blinding, terrifying white. "Harry, no," Hermione screamed, running toward him. She was hit by an invisible barrier 10 feet away. The ground around Harry began to levitate. "The hole in the world needs a seal," Harry said. His voice now a chorus again, echoing with the voices of the Peverell brothers. "If I stay here, the vacuum wins. If I go into the rift, I can pull the edges shut from the inside." "You'll be trapped," Ron yelled, throwing a rock at the barrier in frustration. "You'll be in the void forever. No afterlife. No King's Cross, just nothing." Harry looked at his friends. He saw Ron's loyalty, Hermione's brilliance, and Ginny's fire. He saw the world they could build if the sun came back. He thought about the boy in the cupboard. He thought about the boy who had found a family in a castle of secrets. He realized that his entire life hadn't been a journey toward becoming a hero or a king. It had been a long, slow preparation for a final goodbye. "I was never supposed to live, Ron," Harry said, a single silver tear tracking down his glowing face. "I was a Horcrux. I was a vessel. I was a weapon. For once, I want to be the one who decides when the story ends." Harry looked up at the rift. He raised his hands, and the white light from his body began to stream upward, like reverse lightning. The vacuum fought back. The gray mist of the rift descended, coiling around Harry like a massive, ethereal serpent. It tried to drown him in the memories of his failures, Sirius falling, Dumbledore's charred hand, the fear in the eyes of the students. "I accept the end," Harry whispered. The white light intensified. It became a pillar of pure, unadulterated existence that pierced the heart of the void. The gray mist began to turn to silver. The stars above stopped bleeding. The pressure was immense. Harry's physical body began to blur, turning into the same white petals that had signaled his departure once before. But this time, they didn't drift away. They wove themselves into the sky, forming a new, shimmering layer of reality. "Harry, don't go." Ginny's scream was the last thing he heard. With a final, silent boom of magical force, Harry Potter threw himself into the center of the rift. The sky buckled. The gray mist imploded, being sucked into a single, infinitesimal point of white light that sat in the center of Harry's forehead. For a heartbeat, the entire world saw him, the boy with the lightning scar, standing at the edge of the universe, holding the door shut with his bare hands. Then, the point of light winked out. The rift was gone. The sky was a deep, velvet blue. The stars were just stars again. The survivors in the courtyard fell to their knees. The silence was absolute. The cold was gone, replaced by a soft, spring breeze that smelled of damp earth and blooming lilies. Hermione walked to the center of the courtyard. The stone was scorched, a perfect circle of white ash where Harry had stood. In the center of the ash lay a single, unscarred, wooden wand. It wasn't the Elder Wand. It was holly and phoenix feather. 11 inches. Beside it lay a pair of round, wire-rimmed glasses, one lens cracked. "He's gone," Ron whispered, his voice breaking. "No," Hermione said, picking up the glasses and holding them to her chest. She looked up at the moon. "He's just holding the door." Far away, in the deepest part of the Forbidden Forest, a single white lily pushed its way through the snow and bloomed in the dark. The world was safe. The master was silent, but the price of the peace was a debt that could never be repaid. End of Chapter 14. Chapter 15. The Last Light. The world did not forget Harry Potter, but it stopped fearing him. 10 years had passed since the sky was stitched shut. The wizarding world had rebuilt itself on the foundations of old blood or the iron of stability, but on the memory of a boy who chose to be a lock. Magic had returned, but it was different, softer, more rhythmic, as if it were breathing in sync with a distant, steady heart. Hogwarts had been restored. The stones were clean, the great hall was full of laughter, and the shadows in the corners were just shadows again. On the grounds, where the white ash had once been, a massive, unyielding tree of silver-white wood now grew, its leaves shimmering like the surface of the veil. Ron Weasley, now the head of the Auror office, stood at the base of the tree. He looked older, his face etched with the lines of a man who had seen the end of the world and survived the peace. Beside him, Hermione, the Minister for Magic, leaned against the trunk, her fingers tracing a jagged scar in the bark that looked suspiciously like a lightning bolt. "The resonance is peaking again," Hermione said softly. She held a small, glass orb, a device of her own invention, that hummed with a pure, white frequency. "He's still there, Ron. Right on the edge of the atmospheric layer. He hasn't moved an inch in a decade. He was always a stubborn git," Ron said, a sad, proud smile touching his lips. "Give him a door to guard, and he'll stand there until the sun goes out." "It's more than guarding, Ron," she whispered, looking up at the silver leaves. "The magic we're using, it's filtered through him. Every Lumos, every Patronus, it's a piece of his will. He didn't just save the world, he became the medium it lives in." In the distance, the Hogwarts Express let out a long, mournful whistle. A new generation of students was arriving. They knew the stories of the Pale King and the Master of Death, but to them, Harry Potter was a myth of sacrifice. A ghost story that ended in a sunrise. Deep within the silver tree, in a space that was neither here nor there, Harry Potter was not resting. He was standing in the center of a vast, infinite hall of mist. To his left was the world of the living, a vibrant, noisy tapestry of color and heat. To his right was the world of the dead, a silent, beautiful horizon of endless stars. He was the seam. He no longer wore the oversized clothes or the wire-rimmed glasses. He was draped in a mantle of starlight and shadow, his eyes the color of the deepest part of the ocean. He held no wand, yet the very air obeyed his thoughts. "You've been here a long time, Harry." The voice came from the mist behind him. Sirius Black stepped forward, looking exactly as he had the night he fell through the veil. He wasn't a memory or a ghost. He was part of the horizon now. "The door is heavy today, Sirius," Harry said, his voice a melodic vibration that shook the mist. There was a surge in London. Someone tried to reach for the old power. Someone tried to remember the king. "And what did you do?" "I gave them a dream of their mother," Harry said, a faint, ethereal smile appearing on his face. "Power is a hunger that never ends. I'm teaching them to be full." Sirius walked to his side, looking out at the world of the living. "They're happy, Harry. Ron, Hermione, Ginny, they've moved on. They've built something good." "I know," Harry said. "I can feel every heartbeat. I can feel the moment they wake up and the moment they close their eyes. I'm the breath in their lungs, Sirius. I'm the reason the dark doesn't bite anymore." "But when does it end for you?" Sirius asked, his voice full of a father's concern. "The Hallows are gone, but you're still the master. You're still the one who can't cross over." Harry looked at the horizon of stars. He saw his mother and father waiting there. He saw Dumbledore, Remus, and Fred. He saw the peace that he had bought for everyone else but could not yet claim for himself. "It ends when the last person who fears the dark finds their way home," Harry said. "Until then, I am the lantern." A small, flickering light appeared in the mist. A soul, newly departed, wandering toward the stars. It looked lost, terrified of the vastness of the transition. Harry reached out a hand. The white light from his palm illuminated the path, turning the terrifying gray void into a bridge of warm, golden sand. The soul saw the light, felt the safety of the master's presence, and began to walk forward with a sense of peace. "Go on," Harry whispered to the soul. "The stars are waiting." As the soul passed, Harry felt a tiny piece of the coldness in his chest melt. Back at Hogwarts, the sun began to set behind the mountains. Ron and Hermione walked back toward the castle, their hands intertwined. The silver tree let out a soft, melodic rustle, a single leaf drifting down and landing on the spot where the boy with the glasses had once stood. The world was not perfect. There would be new villains, new wars, and new mistakes. But as long as the silver tree stood, and as long as the master of the gate remained at his post, the shadows would never again be absolute. Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the king who feared, and the god who served, looked out at the two worlds he held together. He was alone in the silence, but he was not lonely. He was the king of the White Tomb. He was the master of the Hallows. And for the first time in all his lives, he was exactly where he was meant to be. He closed his eyes, and the world breathed with him. The end.